If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Campers and hikers, have you ever genuinely encountered a creepy stranger deep in the wilderness or in the middle of nowhere? What happened?
While we all love hiking, camping, and exploring deep into the woods to find peace after months of daily work, there is often an underlying fear of encountering a cryptid, alien, or creepy forest monster when alone on remote trails. However, we should also consider the potential dangers posed by creepy people in the woods. Many campers and hikers raise concerns about encountering creepy people. This video focuses on the creepy people we encounter in the woods, which can be scarier and more frightening than anticipating a creature or Bigfoot. It includes immersive accounts of individuals' experiences and how they avoided dangerous situations involving stalkers or other humans. Stalker at a lake in upstate New York. This happened earlier this summer. I was on vacation with my cousin, we were both 16, and uncle in upstate New York, Canada. We had a pretty nice house along with a small cabin on the same property that my cousin and I were staying in by a lake that was really in the middle of nowhere, like 40 minutes to the nearest gas station. In our section of the lake, there were two other houses. One was about half a mile away from us, and the other was even farther. Our house is located right by the lake, but we must walk through a small section of forest, approximately 5 feet wide, from the yard to reach the dock. The trees are right up against the water with no beach. My cousin and I decided to go sit on the dock at around midnight. We had been sitting on the dock for about 20 minutes when we heard loud crunching and footsteps coming from the trees approximately 5 yards to the left of the dock, right along the shoreline. It could only have been a bear, deer, or human judging from the sound. My uncle had a chihuahua, so that was out of the question. We wanted to sprint inside, but we hesitated because we were concerned that a bear or moose might chase us. So we stayed out on the dock to try to see what it was. The footsteps stopped for a bit, but as we were trying to look past the trees, a flashlight shone out of them and onto us. We booked it inside, where we saw my uncle and dog sitting on the couch. We searched the whole property and couldn't find anyone or anything. I still have no idea who it was. I was camping in British Columbia, Canada, with my girlfriend at the time. We are at a provincial campground, so other campsites are in the vicinity. As I'm close to falling asleep, I hear footsteps near my tent. There was nothing to be immediately alarmed about. It could easily have been a nearby camper, but since it was around 2 a.m., the late hour heightened my senses. Then I faintly hear what I believe to be my car door lifting, along with my heart rate. I have a hatchet and flashlight beside the bed, but I never realized how vulnerable you are when trying to get out of a small tent until that moment. In my best effort, I unzip quickly and spring up, hatchet in hand, looking 360 around the tent with the beam of the flashlight. Nothing. The woods get really creepy when you're sure something is hiding from you. Feeling extremely spooked, I immediately packed up the tent in the middle of the night, folding it up, wet, of course, and shoving it into the trunk. We drive home, and the next day get a call from the campsite host. Turns out a vehicle was stolen that night, so what I thought I heard was all validated. There must have been someone hiding behind a tree. When I popped out, there was nowhere else to hide. The new girlfriend thinks I'm crazy with my camping pre-sleep preparations. I'm a wetland biologist in PA. I was working in an area undergoing restoration, marking and charting the boundaries of various wetland ecosystems. There was an old farm reservoir that was getting fed by a system of seeps and springs in the hill at the base of the mountain, so I was walking up them and trying to trace them back. Suddenly, as I came over the hill, there was what looked like a small hunting camp or maybe a homeless hideout, old rusted out furniture, a refrigerator, tuna cans, chewing tobacco cans, and a bunch of natty. This situation is not uncommon in areas of public land that were once private. Just as I turn around, there's a very well cleaned and large German Shepherd. Great, now I'm ducked, is what I was thinking, and I readied my shovel handle to defend myself. The dog turns around and is looking at me like it wants me to follow it. Now I'm thinking that it's obviously someone's dog, and it might be trying to get me to come help. I followed the dog up the hill, further past the camp, and in the middle of the woods, I found 20 to 30 old ratty dolls buried up to their necks with their arms pointed up towards a large deer carcass that was looped into a tree. I simply turned around and walked back to the reservoir, then exited the woods and returned to the truck. I was getting married in a month. I wasn't prepared to deal with someone being sacrificed/trying to sacrifice me. The hike was approximately 6 miles off Route 119 on I-81 South. Job's done, never going back. Was hiking in the Catskills during a flash storm. I'd just come off of over 2 hours of descending slate and stone, really treacherous stuff that had the potential for a bad injury. A short way down the trail I come across this couple asking for directions, and the dad had basically a newborn strapped to his chest. I help them get oriented but warn them that it's probably unwise to continue in the direction I had just come from. Dad proceeds to get shitty with me and tell me he knows what he's capable of. Have a good day and be safe, says I. It starts raining again shortly after and doesn't stop, and I run into them near the trailhead. They had turned around. Dad says, well, that might have been the stupidest thing I've ever done. Lol. Went camping with a friend, both about 9 or 10, and we decided to explore the woods at night. We were about 5 minutes away from the campsite. The stars were stunning, and it was wild that you could hear and, see some wildlife. We were walking back, and I turned around. I could hear something trailing behind us. I asked her to flash her light, and there was this thing in the distance. We could only see the outline of it, but my gut was telling me to run. We took off running, and I could hear the thing barreling after us. We were close to the campsite, so whatever it was stopped following us the moment we made it onto the site. We assumed it was a monster or a beast. Now, I clearly remember the shape of the thing. It was a person. A strange man chases me. True story. When I was 12, I liked going to the woods behind our house. We lived in a very quiet area. We would have to drive for 15 minutes before we saw another house nearby. We probably had about 6 acres of forest behind our house. This forest was strange. It had weird things in it, such as nails in trees, random metal objects on the ground, etc. Well, one day, I went to the woods, and I would usually walk north, but this time I wanted to walk east. So, I did. The east seemed way stranger than the rest of the forest. I saw dead rabbits, birds, and even a dead bear. At this point I was scared, and it was getting late, so I decided to go back home. I turned around and walked about 10 feet, and I started hearing movement in a bush. I turn around, and I don't see anything, so I shrug it off as a bird or squirrel. I kept walking, and I kept hearing noises, so I walked faster because I was getting real scared. Then, I hear loud thumping footsteps. Getting closer and closer. I turn around for a quick second and see a man, probably 6 feet 5 inches tall, running after me. He only had one strip of clothing around his waist, similar to Tarzan, and he had 3 teeth in his mouth at most. He was scared and bruised everywhere on his body. I start bolting. Probably the fastest I've ever run. And that's saying something because I do track now. He was gaining on me, and right before it looked like he was about to get me, I came out of the woods. Upon reaching our back porch, I glanced back, only to find him nowhere in sight. I ran in and told my parents everything that happened. They didn't believe me until they saw a huge scratch on the back of my neck. I still have the scar today. I must have gotten scratched right before I got out of the woods because that was the closest he got to me. I didn't even feel it. We later moved out of that house. Thank God. When I was a kid, maybe 10, my parents took our family of 4 to Mark Twain National Forest. We did not go to a campground. For whatever reason, we arrived around dusk, and we had to hurry to set up camp. Soon after, we discovered that we had forgotten a lantern, and it became very dark. My stepfather was an alcoholic and a mean drunk to boot, so there was a lot of yelling, and instead of lighting a campfire, we went to bed. As we all lie there, trying to sleep, we begin to hear dead leaves rustle in the distance, as if someone were walking through the forest. Time was passing slowly as we listened to the sound getting closer. My sister, 12, my mother, my drunk stepdad, and I were petrified, hoping that since we have no lights and because the person walking through the forest didn't have a flashlight, we may avoid notice. A few moments later, as the sound of shuffled walking was within just a few yards, the stranger stepped on a twig, and it snapped. My father belted out a blood-curdling scream, and my mother shrieked, "Let's get out of here." All 4 of us bolted out of the tent toward the car, my brave parents in the lead. After a few terrifying moments, we reached our Honda Civic hatchback, and we took off for home. We never went back for our things, and I hate camping to this day. I am 43, and I still dream about this. I've been solo hiking for about 5 years now. I've met some of the warmest, kindest people on hikes in the middle of nowhere across several states. Only once did I actually fear something would happen. I was hiking out in Wisconsin, the Ice Age National Scenic Trail, and I thought it was fairly popular, so I wasn't too worried about it. I noticed 2 men a little ahead of me. I got a little nervous, but they seemed to be walking at a leisurely pace and just chatting. I slowed down because I wanted to keep them in front of me, and I noticed that they slowed down after they noticed me behind them. After a while, I realized that they were going to camp eventually, which meant I either had to pass them or camp behind them, so I slowed down some more. While I was trying to set up camp, I saw one of them starting to walk back toward me. The conversation was very awkward. He invited me to stay near them and have dinner with them. I politely declined. He made a few very creepy remarks about how we were far from anything and anyone. I attempted to express that I was simply very tired and wanted to go to bed, but then he mentioned having a fantasy about being in the wilderness and going primal, describing it as a kink. At that point, my stomach dropped. I genuinely believed I might have to either run for my life or fight back. After a few tense moments, he started laughing and told me not to worry, then walked back. I didn't sleep a single second and turned back first thing in the morning. Danger in the forest. Can the good men here speak with the men in your lives and tell them that this non-consensual crime is not okay? This is not spoken about enough. I was hiking in the public woods 20 miles outside of my city. As I traveled through a series of switchbacks, I worked my way down a ridge towards a small shelter at a trail intersection. I hadn't seen anyone for 2 miles. In the shelter, I saw a man, and my initial thought was that he was relieving himself. Nope, it was actually a man touching himself while recording me with his phone. He looked quite out of place, not wearing hiking-type gear. He was tall, white, and in his 20s to 40s? Wearing a blue ball cap and white tee. He strangely had a big golf umbrella. He looked all set up as if this was his sole purpose. As if this was not the first time. He now has a video of me. I had to pass him to move along my trail, a mile from my car. My trail, of course, was going straight uphill. I felt extraordinarily panicked, my adrenaline skyrocketing. I only felt flight, I felt like prey, unsure if he would now follow me. I couldn't look back because I couldn't imagine engaging in eye contact. I was in a horror movie. I actually experienced a public masturbator 25 years ago on a Fort Lauderdale street. I am positive most women have similar experiences, and we don't talk about it enough. I love enjoying nature, it makes me feel like a child at play. It makes me feel connected to the world. It makes me feel small in a good way, so present to my existence. This horrific experience made me feel the opposite of all of these beautiful things. I feel a rage. I feel a sense of restriction as a woman, knowing that any ordinary, unfit man will inevitably possess greater strength than myself. He would not have done this to a man. He would not have done this to a group. He specifically did it to a lone woman. It makes me sad for all of us. My boyfriend and I did a trip to Glacier National Park. One day we went for a hike in a very secluded area outside of the park in a thick forest. It was absolutely beautiful. At the trailhead there was a large sign saying, "You're in grizzly country. Be bear aware." Once we started hiking, I realized I didn't see any other people and no other cars parked in the lot. It was eerily silent in the forest. Initially, we were walking briskly, and I was so captivated by the beauty that I was not even conscious of my thoughts. However, as we ventured further, the stillness began to affect me. I realized we had no weapons at all. I usually hike with a gun in my home state of Colorado, but we flew to Montana, so I didn't bring the gun. I said I was getting nervous, and my boyfriend just shrugged it off. But suddenly the hair went up on the back of my neck, and I stopped. I had never experienced that sensation before, and it truly frightened me, as I was alarmed by my gut instinct. I said, "I'm going back, let's go. Let's go." My boyfriend followed me, making fun of me. But we got back to the car, and I had never felt so relieved. Yes, I had to deal with my boyfriend mocking me, but I didn't care. No, we didn't see a bear on that hike, but I know something was out there. It was more like a large park/reserve than wilderness or something paranormal, and it was located between my house and my best friend's house. It was a grassy area filled with pine trees. When we were 16, my friend invited us over for a sleepover, and we all went to the reserve to play at night. That's the typical behavior of teenage girls, I suppose. Anyway, we were collecting pine cones from around these immense pine trees, and we were throwing them onto a pile in the middle of the grass clearing. I can't remember the reason, it was 14 years ago. It's almost midnight by this point, and one of my friends screams and comes sprinting back over to us. "There's a man watching us." We all laugh and think she's kidding for a brief moment. Then she points over at a pine tree, and lo and behold, a ducking bald dude wearing all white is hiding behind the tree peering out at us. We didn't stay to find out who the strange man was or why he was there. Instead, we ran back to the house in terror. The next morning we went out to the reserve again, and our pile of pine cones was gone. Since then, we have shared the legend of the Pinecone Man, and no one has walked through the reserve alone at night again. It was a very safe neighborhood, so we'd walk back and forth between each other's houses in the evening before this, but not after Pinecone Man. Back in 2010 I was doing a solo bike camping trip through the Gifford-Pinchot NF in Washington state. I embarked on a backroads trip from Portland to Seattle, utilizing the Baby Shoe Pass route if you are familiar with the area. One day I was near Big Tire Junction and looking for a campsite. My plan was generally to find a random Jeep trail and follow it until I saw a good campsite. The first trail I tried, I ran into a bear, so I rang my bike bell a bunch and scared it away. I turned around to find a new trail. Eventually, I found a good spot on a random Jeep trail located about 50 miles from the nearest human habitation. I was at about 4,200, so the mosquitoes were horrible. I hadn't brought a tent, so I crawled into my bag around 8:30 for some respite. Maybe 20 minutes after I went to bed, I heard an engine. I peeked my head out and saw a truck driving down the trail. I locked eyes with the guy driving it, and he passed my camp and disappeared a bit down the road. I pulled out my map and confirmed that the trail I was on ended after descending the canyon for a mile or two. What is this guy doing? Why is he here so far from literally anything? Then I realized there were two humans on planet Earth who knew where I was, me and this guy doing God knows what in the middle of a giant forest an hour away from any town or main road. Holy shit. I was pretty freaked but ended up staying put. 30 minutes later he came back up the trail, drove past me, and vanished. I had a hard time sleeping that night, as I was nervous about the bear and the weirdo, but nothing happened. The next night I camped at an abandoned campground near Tukluk Lake. Despite a massive berm placed by the Forest Service, some yahoos arrived and proceeded to get wild and drunk and started blasting away with their guns. They definitely didn't know I was there. Again I hunkered down and woke up at 5 a.m. the next morning to slip out before they woke up. Weird trip, but damn do I miss having the kind of life where I could spend a week riding a bike in the woods alone. A creepy man in the night. This happened to me during high school, about 2013 or 14. I was walking home one particular night after work at about 11 or midnight. I figured since it wasn't a very bad neighborhood that I'd leave the road and use the train tracks to get to my street. My first mistake. Off a ways, I could see a white man who wasn't wearing a shirt. It was late spring/early summer, so it didn't seem that weird. But he was walking in my direction, and even though my town wasn't that bad, I was still cautious. So I stood up straight and pulled my shoulders back so as to give the impression I could handle myself, which I couldn't, but he even mentioned that he noticed how confident I looked. As I begin to pass him, he begins to talk to me, and being the kind southerner I am, I speak back. My second mistake. I don't remember much of what he said to me, but I do remember him referring to his father as Lucius, like Malfoy from Harry Potter, and referring to himself as Lion Child. And now that I was closer, I could see his torso had lots of tattoos, none of which stood out. Eventually I got the conversation to end and said, "I need to go home now," and he replied, "You don't need to go back there." I was still freaking out but didn't want to show it. Anyway, after all that, he asked me to do him a favor, which I obliged. This turned out to not be a bad thing. He had a bike lying just within the tree line, and he got it out and asked me to take it to the local soup kitchen. I got on and rode off as fast as I could without making it obvious. It was too late to do anything, so I took it to my house and was going to take it to the soup kitchen the next day, which I did. When I got there, there were a couple of people outside. I asked them if they knew whose bike it was. They said it had just gotten stolen from a guy named Steve, which was the name Lion Child had said to return it to. This part gets a little supernatural. That night I had a dream that involved a regular customer. In real life I never asked his name, but in my dream I called him Steve. The next day at work he came in like he did every day and got his usual coffee. I told a coworker the story, and she went and asked his name. It turned out to be the same Steve who had his bike stolen, which is why I said it wasn't a bad thing I did the favor for Lion Child, since the bike got returned. Hiking through creepy isolated areas, how do you stay safe and secure? I have taken an interest in hiking over the past couple of months. I started to go to higher elevation mountains. Today I conquered my first hill above 2,000 feet, with my mom. Ascending this hill invokes hiking through a forest and then up the hill through fields. The forest was really creepy to us, we were the only people in there. I found 2 open condom packages on the path, which was a tad icky. There was a lot of rubbish dumped in the middle of the forest. It appeared that someone was preparing for a fire. We walked past a fire dam that had a white ball-shaped thing lying in it. My mom was really worried that it was a dead body. My dad said that it was probably an animal. Though I'm not sure what it was. We didn't see a single person on our route up and down the hill. I won't be going up there again, but given that there was a recent suicide in a forest where I live, I have been apprehensive about going through forests alone. I find it particularly unsettling to venture into isolated forests. I do go through a lot of forests, and coming across a body or people getting intimate has always been something on my mind. I know that my father has told me that certain local forests are known for people getting frisky, so that's something I'm always fearful of coming across. The areas to me are prime locations where a suicide could happen too. So I'm wary of coming across that. How do you people stay safe when going through isolated regions like this? The hill was near a town, but it was in an isolated rural area where I think you would be stuck if you were accosted by someone else. I was quite creeped out going through the forest, to be honest. It kind of put me off hiking through areas like this. Early September, central Pennsylvania, 6:45 a.m., we awakened to a man screaming, "Bear! Bear! BR!" Even though we have safely contained everything at our site, the warning still evokes a certain amount of panic. Not entirely sure what to do, we peek out the tent window to see he's actually pacing back and forth versus going from site to site or fleeing/evading/using karate. We then learned that the man's dog was named Bear and that Bear had wandered off into the woods, prompting the man to call for his return. I went to the forest. And what I saw there still haunts me to this day. I live in a very rural area somewhere in Europe, and I used to go to the forest quite often on my bike, by walking, or in my car. I would commonly go there all alone to collect rocks and take pictures or play around with fire. On a really warm summer day, I parked my car near a giant rock while driving through the forest, and then I began walking along a long, stretched path. As I was walking, I heard what sounded like a hissing sound coming from my right side, pretty close actually. I thought it was a fox. I looked to my right, and I saw a weird figure doing what seemed like abstract movements. I couldn't see the shape of the figure at all due to the trees and leaves obstructing my view, so I slowly moved forward, and at that moment, it began to take shape. It appeared to have creamy skin. As I'm moving, I immediately noticed that this figure is actually a completely naked guy making odd movements with his arms. He was on a blue carpet and wearing a brown hat backwards. I recall there was a backpack on his side. To this day I still think he was doing yoga, and I just didn't know what it actually was. I think he somehow noticed me looking at him even when he was not looking at me, because he just randomly took his stuff and began running to my left. I ran to my car and went home, and I wouldn't be able to sleep that night. To this day I still think about it. It was incredibly scary to me. It could have been a crazy guy who tried to end me or something. The man in the woods. My sister, my cousin, and I all spend time together when my sister and I visit our grandparents. My cousin lives in South Carolina, while my sister and I live in a small town in North Carolina. We were all sitting on my grandma's back porch, talking and hanging out at my grandparents' house, which is surrounded by woods. While we were there, we kept hearing noises coming from inside the house where my grandparents were asleep, so we decided to go back inside and into the room. We all sat down, talked, joked around, and looked at videos we had taken outside. While doing this, we noticed a figure inside the sliding glass doors who was sitting up and staring at us, but we just brushed it off. A few hours later, by this time it was around 3 a.m., my sister fell asleep, and my cousin and I were awake, and he heard heavy footsteps in the hallway and what sounded like a bag. She and I were super freaked out, so we turned on some music and went to sleep. The next night, we went out to the pool and hot tub, where I saw something that was 6 to 7 feet tall in the woods, staring at the three of us girls, so we quickly left, went inside the house, and locked all the doors. The following night, the same incident occurred, but my grandma dismissed our concerns, as she didn't believe in things like gosh and similar expressions. It was the same thing in the woods, but it came back every night from 12 a.m. to 5 a.m. Campsite stalker. I have always been uncomfortable with the story that I am about to type to you all. I thought it would be interesting to share my own scary camping experience, partly because it was so odd and out of the ordinary, but also because I am starting to go camping again. This happened during the summer of 2012 when I was 15 and still an active member of a local Boy Scouts troop. I went camping, something my troop had frequently done. The camp we chose was for a full weekend. It was a nice forested area with taller grass. We saw no cars or other campers while we were there. Since we did not have to worry about other campers, our troop had a big campfire on Saturday night that went late into the night. Eventually, our campfire began to dwindle, prompting us to extinguish it, retreat to our individual tents, and settle down for the night. Oddly for me, I was unable to sleep that night. I usually slept well on campouts, especially when I had the pleasure of using a tent alone, like I had done on this occasion. So, I sat there in complete silence listening to the various sounds around my tent. Eventually, I found myself dozing off until I heard something walking nearby our campsite. There was a very apparent rustling of grass that began to get closer and closer to the blob tents that our boys were sleeping in. After a solid minute of movement, the sound stopped right in front of a tent that was about 7 or so feet from mine. I then heard the rustling start up again and head off in the direction of the forest. I was paralyzed with fear. What could have made that sound? I thought about it for a solid few minutes and eventually decided it must have been an adult checking on us. Before I went to sleep, I looked out the little tent mesh window at the side of my tent and did not see anything out of the ordinary in our campsite. This sound went on for a bit in the distance, but I did not record for how long, as I eventually fell asleep. I woke up later that night to the same sound of rustling, yet this time it was closer to our tent circle than it was the first time I heard it. While I did not think too much of this, I silently listened to the sound to see where it was headed. It once again went to the same area it did the first time. Being curious, I peered through the tent window to see what was making the noise. My face turned white, and I could not move. My mind was still trying to register what was going on. I saw a large black figure standing before the tent in the darkness, and it was clear it was not a scout, as the figure had no flashlight on and was far too large to be any boy in our troop. Suddenly, the figure inched their hand to the tent door and began to slowly unzip it. After what felt like several minutes, the figure seemed to poke their head into the tent. Immediately after, a deafening screech came from the tent. I heard other tents being unzipped and saw lights being flashed at one tent, as well as a black figure starting to run away from it. Within seconds, the figure was running out of view into the line of trees. A few adults at the adult camp came to see the commotion. The boys who were in the tent told what they had experienced, and several boys mentioned that they heard the sound of rustling in the grass around our tents throughout the night. Unfortunately, none of the boys were able to get a clear view of the person, except that the figure looked like a man and he wore dark clothing. Disturbed, the adults had us be moved to the campsite where they were staying, and 2 adults volunteered to stay awake for the rest of the night in case of the creep's return. The following morning, we hastily gathered our belongings and hastened our departure. We warned the ranger in charge, who called the local sheriff. As far as I'm aware, no one ever apprehended the individual, and our troop never set up camp there again. It was one of my most frightening experiences, and something I would always remember when I went camping during my time as a Boy Scout. Disturbing encounter in the forest. I recently had an encounter that freaked me out and made me feel uneasy. It happened while I was on a walk with my dog in the forest one evening. I was walking back home because it started getting dark already. About halfway back I saw someone dressed in all black, black jacket, black pants, and black shoes, with a hood on, standing next to a road that goes through the forest and staring into the distance. I was still pretty far away, and it would take me about 2 minutes to get close to him. As I was getting closer, he looked towards my direction and readjusted his hood and started slowly walking backwards, and when I got even closer, he started slowly walking forwards towards where our paths would cross and then just suddenly stopped and stared in the distance. I just quickly walked past him, but it still freaked me the hell out. I went to a wilderness program in Utah. Duchesne, Utah. I was there in 2005. Our shelters were located far away from base camp, making it impossible for us to communicate with each other. I had 2 creepy experiences there, though. I was there in winter. One night it snowed heavily. I woke in the middle of the night to a bright-ass light. Like it was shining on me. As I opened my eyes, the tree above me glowed brightly, as if a spotlight was shining on it. I was too terrified to look for the source. There was no chance that a staff member was responsible, as they never checked on us. My shelter had partly collapsed under the snow. I shoved my head deep into my sleeping bag and forced myself back to sleep. When I woke in the morning, I noticed that no more snow had fallen, as my shelter remained in the same partially collapsed state as it was the night before. I looked for footprints, and there were 0, just a slight indentation from my tracks when I first went to sleep. I asked the staff, and they all confirmed that they had slept through the night. The other kids didn't have lights or even boots since staff takes them at night, as you know, so it wasn't them. Another time, they had moved us to the desert since winter was too intense in the mountains. I was setting up my shelter at a new camp, and the staff dog was sitting at the base of one of my shelter trees, staring up at it. This dog was super energetic, and I had never seen it so fixated on anything, ever, not even food. I figured it saw an animal, but I couldn't see anything on the tree. It stayed like that the whole 30 minutes we were setting up. Then when we had to head back to base camp, the dog's owner called her, and she would not budge. The owner said, "Hey, she'll come when she's ready." The dog finally showed up to camp about 2 hours later. Whatever. Then once night fell, we were having a therapy group around the fire. Out in the trees, these crazy sounds started happening. They seriously sounded like human moans. All of us kids started freaking the duck out, and staff was just like, "It's an animal, it's fine." The sound was coming from the direction of our shelters. After a while the staff called a staff meeting that we weren't allowed to listen in on and then told us half of them were going to investigate. That, of course, petrified us. They were gone for about an hour. It's a really long time when you're used to going to sleep early / being on a strict schedule. They said they found nothing. Went to the shelters, and that dog ran right back to my tree and stared up at it again. I begged to move my shelter, but they wouldn't let me. Nothing happened, but wow, I was ducking scared. Terrifying night in the woods. I keep trying to forget about this story, but it keeps coming back into my memory even after years. I'm really curious if anybody has experienced anything similar. I went to college in rural Appalachia. I had heard all the previous rules about being in the woods at night: no whistling, don't be out after dark, ignore crying deep in the woods, etc. But on this particular night I ignored the most important rule: stay out of the woods from dusk till dawn. I was on a very rural stretch of the Blue Ridge Parkway to watch the sunset with my then girlfriend. We wound up getting pretty comfortable lying down in the back of my car, to the point we started dozing off. I want to say I woke up about 45 minutes after the sun had gone down, and the woods were dead silent. I instantly felt that something was wrong. I had a very strange feeling that I was being watched. Knowing something was off, I gently tried to wake my girlfriend to leave when all of a sudden, I heard this gut-wrenching scream from the woods beside my car. I know that mountain lions and foxes can scream, but this was not like that. It sounded like a full-grown man screaming bloody murder. I instantly got out of the car, slammed my trunk shut, and ran to the driver's door to drive away. As I was putting my key in the ignition, I heard an almost maniacal laughing and what sounded like footsteps bolting towards us. I matted the gas pedal and got the hell out of there. Neither of us spoke the entire drive back to campus. I have avoided that stretch of the parkway ever since. I have no idea what on earth happened. There are no hiking trails, buildings, or campsites anywhere near where we were. Anyway, I just thought I would share. Please don't wander in the woods after dark. I don't want to know what could have happened if I didn't wake up. I met a weird guy in the Wind River Range last week. I spent 6 days backpacking. It was in a mountain pass at 12,000 feet. He had no hiking gear and was fishing in a lake up there. I highly doubt there are fish up there considering it's a snowmelt lake. The lake is situated at a high elevation. Anyway, weird convo, and as I hiked out, I kept hearing what sounded like screaming in the winds behind me. Maybe I was just being paranoid and crazy since I had been out so long. But I hiked like a beast to get through the area. I also had a rock get thrown at me in the middle of the woods when I hit the tree line. Like it landed right behind me, with no cliff or anything near. Either I was freaking out, or someone was following me. But, needless to say, I hiked 28 miles that day, lol. I also looked up news to see if anything went down in the area, missing persons, etc. The screaming part is what messed with me the most. The sound was distant and appeared to come from behind me. Maybe just crazy mountain spirits lol. One time I, Tiny, 32 female, was driving in NJ and drove by a place I wanted to check out, so I decided to stop and go hiking by myself. I determined that it would be a very brief hike, given that I lacked provisions such as food and water. I did not even carry my backpack. For reference, it was fall, so all the leaves were on the ground. I started walking and heard a growl, but it sounded like it was far away. I didn't know who was growling because I had never heard that sound before. I keep walking, and I see a sign: beware of bears. My heart started beating faster, but I heard the growling again, and so I stopped to look up what bear growls sound like. Sure enough, I confirmed that it was a bear. I start walking back the same way I came from, only that it felt like I was walking in circles because everything looked the same, and then I start walking faster but try to calm my nerves at the same time. At that point my phone didn't have service, I tripped, and my leg got stuck in a hole that was on the ground covered by leaves. I managed to get my leg out. At that moment, I was extremely anxious and panicking. Without knowing, I walked deeper into the trail, and there were no signs. The only thing I was now facing were 2 deer. I have never in my life been that close to deer. Anyway, after passing the deer, I saw a mother with her 2 children playing on a huge rock, so I got closer and asked her for directions to the closest exit to reach my car. She looked me up and down, grabbed her children, and told me she couldn't help me because she was afraid that I had COVID, which I didn't believe. Anyway, at that point I just wanted to cry because 2 hours had already passed. I kept walking, but at this point I was honestly praying more than I can remember walking. Finally I saw a dad with 3 kids. I asked for help, and this kind gentleman was able to give me directions, and I was finally able to make it to the car. The moment I got in the car, I downloaded all trails. This hike was truly the most terrifying experience I've ever had. Also, If anybody is listening to this and has ever behaved like that lady did with me, please, if you ever see someone who needs help while hiking, the color of their skin shouldn't matter. Please help the ones you can help. We are all human beings. This happened to me once. Wanted to watch a meteor shower on a cross-country road trip by myself. Pulled off the highway in California an hour outside Sacramento and found a field. Pulled up. I got on the roof of my car with my headphones in and a blanket. The nearest lights were about a mile away. Quiet. Calm. Lovely night. Peeped some meteorites. Hail to the Thief playing in my ears. After about 20 minutes of peace, I heard a noise that cut through the music. It sounded like a loud, raspy, phlegmatic cough. Drawn out, gasping. I perked up and pulled out an earbud to listen. Was it a dog, I thought? Barking? I looked around at the empty field I was in. I could see in all directions because of the moonlight and clear skies. Nothing moving. There was no sound of grass rustling. No insects. The only sound was the gentle movement of the wind. Then I heard it again. Louder. Closer. Clear as anything. Ha-ah-ah. The sound went up at the end. Aggressive. I sat bolt upright on the roof of my car, clutching my belongings. Still in denial, I thought, dog? Then I heard dogs barking in the distance. Not a dog. My feet didn't even touch the ground. I snaked down the side of my car and into the open driver's side window. I started driving in full flight mode, shaking from adrenaline. All the windows of my car were open to let in the night air, and as I was fleeing, I had a panic thought that it had already gotten in the car. I almost crashed into a ditch, punching at the bags and blankets in my back seat to make sure I was alone. I've heard foxes screaming. I've heard owls grumbling. I've heard asthmatic dogs and mountain lions calling and humans with COPD clearing their throats. I've never heard a noise like that before or since. I call it the night cougher, and whatever the duck it was, I'm glad I didn't meet it. Backpacking in Western Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains. I'm about 5 miles up a trail in the backcountry at the top of a mountain. It's dusk and about to get cold. The sun is setting, but there's still some light. My camp is about 25 yards off the trail in the middle of nowhere. While tending the fire I had made and preparing to boil some water, I heard someone say, "Hey there, stranger," and he asked if he could walk through my camp to take a picture. Dude sounds and looks like Ned Flanders. He's wearing very short shorts and high white tube socks, with a tank top on. Has a big mustache and is balding on top. So I say, "Yeah," and he says, "Hi, just looking to take some pictures of this outcrop at the other side of my camp." I was like, "Okay, dude." He then starts yelling, "Whoa, that is a sexy limestone outcrop." He has a little digital camera like I had in the early 2000s and just went to town. He was taking pictures of this outcrop like a supermodel in NYC. Bending down and purring at it. Calling it beautiful and saying, "Work it, baby." After a few minutes he starts making moaning sounds like he is going to come. He then stops abruptly, says thanks, and runs off up the mountain. Dude had zero gear with him. No backpack or anything. This was a one-way trip up the mountain, and I never saw him again. I didn't see him come down at all. It was so ducking strange. He was creepy but definitely not threatening. He was more akin to someone on the spectrum, unaware of the strangeness around him. I went to summer camp in a rural part of New Jersey back in the mid-1990s. The camp was situated on a long, narrow man-made lake. One end of the lake was reserved for swimming, which we do as a group activity every other day or so. The swimming area had one long dock stretching straight out into the water and 2 square floating docks further out. One of the 2 floating docks was a bit far away, and although I had spent a few summers at this camp at the time of this incident, I had never seen anyone use the second dock. One day, our group of approximately 12-11-year-olds decided to swim to the distant dock. I would consider this a moderate challenge for a casual swimmer. When we reached the dock, I noticed a strange-looking spider on the ladder that you had to use to climb. It was huge in terms of overall footprint, probably about 2 inches, 5 centimeters, from end to end, with long skinny legs. Spiders are normal critters to encounter in nature, but this one stood out to me because of its unusual appearance. After the long swim, we took a few minutes to lie on the dock and rest in the sun. It was relaxing, and we were all having a good time. We started messing around and decided to play one of our regular games where we would all shuffle toward the corner of the dock, causing it to sink. As the corner of the dock started to sink and fill with water, suddenly hundreds of giant spiders came frantically pouring out from between the boards, swarming over and around the feet of those of us who were still standing on dry ground. This dock was theirs, apparently. We all immediately began to scream and jump into the water, trying to get away, but the spiders were in the water too, and they stuck to us as we swam. I vividly remember the feeling of them clinging to my wet hair, fleshy bodies, and long, squirming legs hopelessly intertwined with my strands. Adrenaline propelled us back to the main part of the swimming area, and by the time we got there, thankfully we were spider-free. But the experience is a childhood trauma that lingers with me. I had not really been afraid of spiders before, but I would say this was a major turning point. The thought of us lying on the dock in the sun, completely oblivious to the horde that was lurking just inches beneath us, creeps me out to this day. Encounter at 2 a.m. Saturday night I drove up a mountain to some BLM land in southwestern Oregon with my dog to see the northern lights. I had read somewhere they were supposed to happen for 2 nights, and found a great spot on a peak. As it got darker, people started showing up and stopping at other sites I could see from mine. A few vehicles came up the small hill to where I was but turned around when they saw me. The night ended up being a bust, no lights in the sky other than the stars. Everyone around left eventually, leaving just myself and my dog. I made dinner, set up my camera for some night-lapse video, and went to sleep for the night. Around 2 a.m. I was awakened by a vehicle driving up the hill to my campsite. I figured they would turn around and go to a different spot. Instead, they parked 6 feet away from my car, got out, and started walking around. My dog started growling, and I asked if they needed something. His response was no, and then I asked why, with all the other spots to go to nearby, he parked in my campsite. He immediately got angry and called me rude, told me he was being quiet, and said that he paid taxes so he could use the campsite whenever he wanted. I got out and grabbed my camera and chair as quickly as I could while trying to keep an eye on someone I could barely see. I wanted to argue with him, but I really didn't want to get murdered. I just got back in my car and left. I briefly considered pulling into another spot along the logging road but eventually just decided to go home. My wife says I did the right thing by just leaving, but it's been on my mind since then, and it's just keeping me in a bad mood. What would you have done in that situation? Creeper in the forest. Ever since I was 6, I walked home from school. I'm from a very little town with lots of green, few houses, basically no crime, and everyone knows everyone, and I only lived about 1 kilometer away from the school, so it wasn't a big deal. On my way home I'd pass a small forest with goats and sheep, so in the spring I'd always go look for lambs and baby goats. It was safe and fun, and I never had any trouble. I still did the same when I was 12. By then, there were rumors about somebody, we call that type potlood venter, which translates as pencil seller, and I'm not sure how to really say it in English. Basically, it's some guy wearing a long coat, only a coat, flashing people. I didn't pay attention to the warnings, because those things are always just rumors. So I went in the forest, looking for baby animals. You guessed it, this guy wasn't made up and suddenly just stood in front of me, fully exposed, stroking himself. Little detail about me, when I get scared or nervous, I have the weird habit of laughing. So I'm looking at this guy in shock and start laughing hysterically, and I just can't stop myself. It gets so bad I can hardly breathe. I'm thinking to myself, shit, I should run. I'm going to get this guy so mad he's going to do something to me. I have to get out of here, but I still can't stop. Obviously, I still keep an eye on this guy, checking if he's coming closer or doing other weird things, and I just see him staring back at me in confusion. Slowly, his face starts turning red as if he's as nervous as I am. He seems to shrink and stops stroking himself. He then, looking embarrassed and disappointed, closes his coat and just runs away from me. And I got home without looking back once. I did call the police, and they checked the area more often, but I never heard about another incident. It looks like he just stopped. I didn't reach the point where I needed to defend myself, but I thought I might have to. A man was following me as I hiked. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but my instincts kept telling me someone was there. He wasn't on the trail but off the path in the woods, tracking my movements. I saw him hiding behind trees and other obstacles. To be honest, I didn't know what to do. I had a previous encounter with the same guy about an hour earlier. I had reached the top of the trail and sat down on the ground to admire the view. Suddenly, this person came out of nowhere, set his backpack down, and pulled out a beer. He then shotgunned the beer, looked me right in the eye, and kept hiking. It genuinely freaked me out, so I told myself I was done hiking for the day and decided to turn around. About 15 minutes later, as I was making my way down, the same guy came sprinting down the path at full speed. He pushed me as he passed but kept running. After that, I continued hiking, and that's when he started the strange stalking behavior I mentioned above. Looking back, I find it all very odd. It was a beautiful day, in the middle of the afternoon, on a well-traveled trail. I was camping in Montana in a fairly secluded area with a female friend, I'm also a girl, and my dog. At the dead end of a road, there were 4 campsites by a lake. On the first night, there was a family camping with us, but by the second night, they had left, leaving just my friend and me. Important to know, on the far side of the lake there were some houses, but they were too far for us to really hear or be bothered by. Anyway, it's fairly late, so we head to bed. My friend is dead asleep, and I'm trying to fall asleep when I hear the sound of a sputtering, dinky little motorboat coming closer. Kind of weird, but whatever. It comes closer and closer, and then I hear it just kind of hovering right at the edge of our side of the lake. Then I hear a creepy old man's voice. "Hey girls, come in my boat, we can go party at my house across the lake." WTF. I freak out and completely freeze and stop breathing. I try and nudge my friend awake, but she's knocked out. He tries calling out "hey girls" a few more times, and we are just quiet. I guess upset at getting no response, he shines a huge light right at our tent and starts yelling, "I know you girls are in there. Come on, we are going to have so much fun at my house, just you wait and see." I'm terrified, I have a knife that I'm gripping tightly, and I'm trying to devise a plan in case he actually approaches us. My dog is protective but also quiet, so at this point he's just alert and waiting. He tried calling us out for a few more minutes, felt like hours to me. Then finally I guess he gave up, and I heard the boat driving away. I stayed up the whole night convinced he would come back to end us, and the next morning I told my friend what happened, and we booked it out of there. Might have been some horny old perv, but it felt more sinister than that. Haven't been back to that spot since. This happened to me and my friend. First, I want to mention that my friend Steve and I have been suspecting some creepy occurrences around his house over the past week. Okay, on with the story. 2 days ago, I and a couple of other people were hanging outside in front of one of their houses, and we were talking about making mac and cheese. Well, I looked over and saw a hand in the window of the neighbor's house, and I thought nothing of it until Steve said he saw it too and said his neighbor was gone for the week. We started messing around like a couple of teen guys we are and got up to the house and stuff, thinking we were cool, and then we heard real knocks coming from the other side of the window. We all screamed and ran inside and grabbed weapons, threatening whoever was inside to come out. The knocks happened a couple more times, then we just forgot about it and went inside. Skip forward 2 days. Steve wanted to get his hair dyed blue, so we started bleaching it and then dyeing it blue. He was sitting in the kitchen and playing Geometry Dash on his phone, then he heard a knock on his door, and he asked me to go check it out. I took a kitchen knife and a flashlight with me and went to go check it out. I found nothing, but I was yelling like a madman, telling the person I was going to stab them if I saw him, which I intended to do if he had a weapon. A couple of minutes into the search, Steve tells me a rock was thrown at the door, so I looked into the woods and saw something move. I ran at it, but nothing was there. It is 1:39 a.m. now, and we haven't heard anything since. We don't know if this has a connection with the thing that happened 2 days ago, but we knew someone was messing with us or actually trying to harm us. It wasn't really scary, but I thought I might as well share it because it seemed creepy to me. Thanks for listening. I was backpacking out in the wilderness and hadn't seen another person in 2 days and was sitting by my fire at night when I saw a red light moving toward me. I was a little freaked out that it was a hunter or some creep, especially because I'm a woman. It looked like one of those lights hunters used to see at night, or maybe the laser off a scope pointing my direction. I dealt with it by standing up and moving to where I wasn't lit by the fire and could watch. No one came around, so I eventually went to bed. While hiking the next day, I came across a very rough Forest Service road and guessed it must have been someone on that road. Always tell people where you are going. A friend of mine had a close call this week. Friday morning a friend of mine went out in the deep woods around where we live to spend some time alone. He wasn't following a trail because most of the woods in the area aren't marked. At some point on Friday he slipped and hit his head, passed out for a small period of time, and basically lost all sense of direction. He began walking in one direction a few miles until he found a popular river in the area. He then built a fire and stayed there for the night. The next day he followed the river a little farther until he happened to run into the search party that had been looking for him. It was pretty scary getting a call at 6 a.m. Saturday morning asking if I had any idea where he could have been heading in the area and not having any real answers. Around 11 a.m. I got a text saying, "Not looking good. We've hiked a 15-mile grid almost. We've got state police helicopters and about 50 people in the woods looking." Luckily I also got a phone call an hour later saying that he had been found and he was doing well, though he was taken to the hospital for a CAT scan. This guy is someone that I would trust in the woods any day, and I would have never thought this would happen to him. So I guess what I've taken from this is never assume you'll be alright. Let people know where you are going, Even if it is just a day hike. You never know what will happen, and it never hurts to carry enough to make sure that if that day hike goes sour, you are at least okay alone for another night or two. Although he only suffered a concussion, it could have been much worse. He only left a vague description of where he was heading, but without that, I doubt that he would have been found by the search party. It would have been completely up to him to follow that river even longer. I was traveling solo around the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state and making various stops in the Olympic National Park. I decided to stop in Quinault for the first time and took a random road that dead-ended at a beautiful spot at the edge of the Quinault River. There was an ancient footbridge that led across the river, but it looked like it might collapse if I tried to cross it, so I decided not to. It was off-season, and I was not in a tourist area. I was the only one there. It was so unusually hot outside that I decided that I needed to get in that water. I backed my car all the way to the edge of the dead-end road, faced it out in the direction I would need to leave, and started hiking through thick brush, down an embankment, to the edge of the water. There was no path. It was a pretty rugged area. It was mid-fall, and I didn't have a suit since I didn't plan on swimming, so I just took my clothes off and got in the water in my bra and underwear. I had a nice swim, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched even though I was in the middle of nowhere. After about 5 minutes the creepy feeling was enough for me to want to head back, so I started to climb out, turned my back to the other side of the river, and walked toward my clothes and shoes that I had left behind. When I turned around, there was a big, tall man standing in plain view, just across from me on the other side of the river, but higher up on his embankment than I was on mine. He was wearing a poncho made of animal pelts, had long hair full of sticks and twigs, and looked like he had been living out in the wild for a very long time. We stood and stared at each other, me in frozen terror, for what felt like forever when all of a sudden he frantically took off in the direction of the footbridge leading across the water. I grabbed my car key and tried to grab my clothes and shoes, but they got tangled up in some blackberry vines, so I left everything and went running for my life through the thick brush and blackberries, barefoot in my underwear, trying to make it to my car before he made it across the river. There was no doubt in my mind that he was trying to harm me. When I made it out of the blackberries, I could see he was crossing the bridge toward me rapidly. I got to my car and flung my door open just as he arrived. I locked the doors while he pounded on the hood of my car, just screaming and grunting non-verbally. The moment he went for my driver's side door, I hit the gas and took off as fast as I could. I looked back, and he was chasing after me. He must have run after my car for at least a mile until he faded from view. I was bleeding everywhere from running nearly naked through blackberries. I was wet, unclothed, shaking, and crying. Had I hesitated for literally 10 seconds longer, I don't think I would have made it out alive. Even typing this story out again all these years later, I am starting to shake. I felt like I was being hunted. That is the only way I can describe it. I will never, ever go back to that area. Since that moment, I consistently bring a hiking companion with me whenever I venture into the forest. That day is going to haunt me for life. I have had many years of therapy, and that experience is still as vivid as the day it happened. Had the strangest experience this past weekend. It all started out as a normal, but rainy, camping trip for my wife and me to celebrate our anniversary. We decided to head up toward the Olympic National Forest and find a nice spot to park and set up camp on a forest road. Out of all the forest roads we've been on, this one had quite a few good sites available, and we didn't really have to go far to find a big flat spot. We had a lovely afternoon setting up camp, walking around with our dog, eating snacks we packed, and enjoying the view of the mountains through the trees. As evening got closer, it started sprinkling, which slowly turned into heavy rain for quite a few hours. While we hunkered down under our SUV's canopy, we managed to get a fire lit despite the heavy rain, and we cooked up a lovely dinner on the camp stove. It let up eventually, but we continued to get heavy showers through the night, classic PNW. The real story starts the next morning. The usual routine of lazing around in our mummy sleeping bags until we find the will to emerge into the chill morning air. We enjoy some quick coffee and oatmeal and start cleaning up around the camp. We load up our dog in the SUV to make packing up a little easier. My wife heads back into our tent, the zipper door of which is facing the SUV and the gravel road, while I decide to start organizing some things in and out of the trunk. I am under the car's canopy, obscuring my view of the road and most of my surroundings. My wife, out of the blue, says, "Hello?" I respond to her, wondering what's up. She says, "There is a naked man right there." I poked my head out below the tarp and saw a fully buck-naked man with a beard standing about 3 feet from the front passenger door. Keep in mind we are just parked up on a forest gravel road. We saw a few vehicles parked along the 5 miles we drove in but no obvious signs of people camping close to us. The moment my wife had acknowledged him, he covered his face and turned away from both of us. I retreated away from the car to get closer to my wife. We both tried talking to him. He did not respond to a single word we said. He just stood still and covered his face with his hands, alternating between standing and crouching. When I say he was naked, I mean he had absolutely nothing on him, not even shoes, despite everyone asking about them. He was also shivering terribly, which just made it sad when he wouldn't acknowledge our attempts to give him a blanket. To be honest, I had to fight the urge to try to help him beyond tossing him some warmth and food. This was a complete stranger who hadn't spoken a single word to us, and I didn't want to possibly agitate someone that's going through something. This all went on for about an hour, during which we had called 911 twice to report this naked helpless man to the rangers or anyone who could help and try to get some type of assurance that someone was on the way. We also kept trying to communicate with him and offer him help, but he was in his own world, standing in a puddle that had formed next to the car overnight. Our anniversary trip ended up being the day of 4/20, so this was the morning after. We're not sure if this guy was having a really bad trip or some kind of mental health crisis, but we just wanted him to have some help. For the entire hour, I harbored a persistent fear that he might suddenly become erratic or violent. We slowly packed up, shoved our stuff in the trunk as best we could with this man having his crisis just a few feet away. Thankfully our dog was already in the back seat, and a passerby told us there were some rangers just a mile or so up the road, so we scooted out of there as soon as our stuff was packed and the man had shuffled a few feet further from the car. We drove up the road and saw a ranger truck and told him the whole story. He said he just got the call and was headed that way. My wife and I joke around a little. At one point we were calmly shoving our gear into the trunk, and the man had crouched down next to the puddle and tilted his head towards us, still hands over his face. But was he looking through his fingers? This was our first creepy experience in 7+ years of camping, and we will not forget it. I had a terrifying experience in the Olympic National Park. My girlfriend and I went camping with our dog out in the Olympic National Park near the Hoh rainforest. We were out there for 3 days, and it rained nearly the whole time. On the third night, however, it got suddenly clear, and you could see the stars with such clarity that it was astounding. My girlfriend wandered away into a dark clearing about 50 feet from the campfire and, after a few minutes, told me I needed to go down there and look up at the stars in the clearing. So I leave her and the dog at the campsite and wander down a hill through some trees to a small clearing, and it is pitch black out there. I've got my headlamp in my hand, and I'm really nervous to turn out the light, but I go for it anyways. As soon as the lights are out, I look up at the sky, and not a second later I hear loud running coming right towards me. Like some heavy jumping through bushes. I fumble for my headlamp and turn on the light in time to see 2 sets of eyes staring right at me just beyond the tree line, but I can't make out what they are looking at. I stand there frozen solid for what felt like 10 seconds before 2 elk bound through the bushes and run right past me through the clearing into the night. I was so shaken up from the adrenaline I walked right back to camp almost mechanically and had a beer. It was cool to see some elk, but damn was I scared. This happened when I was 12-ish, with a couple junior high friends. We got the idea of a solo camping trip and, with parental approval, executed it. Throughout the day, we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves, catching and preparing fish, exploring our surroundings, and engaging in various activities typical of adventurous 12-year-olds aspiring to be survivalists. But night came, and we found ourselves huddled around the fire in the dark forest. This was logging land in the middle of nowhere, Alabama. You had to go down a country road, turn off into a cow pasture, and pass through a gate into the pines. The road goes about a half mile in and then dead ends. It's the sort of place you go if you need to dump a body. No cell service, either. We were, of course, telling scary stories. My friend Jake explained the plot of Pet Sematary in excellent detail. It had just come out, and we traded yarns from movies, Lovecraft, and, worst of all, the depths of our twisted imaginations. Eventually, Jake says, "I'm not sleeping in the hammock anymore," and John quickly agrees. We had brought a tent for our gear but intended to sleep in hammocks. I'm rather disappointed but was certainly not going to hang around outside and be the bait. So I go along with it. Our education on the finer points of gremlins and chainsaws continues. Eventually, it gets very dark. Jake and John retreat from the fireside into the tent, where they are much safer. I stay out for a few minutes, but the circle of firelight keeps dwindling. And I obviously can't fend off the things in the woods by myself. So I enter the tent, where our discussion reaches new heights. After about a half hour, John divides our supply of knives. Since we were 12-year-old wannabe survivalists, this was extensive. I ended up with a throwing knife, 2 sheath knives, and 3 dinky pocket knives. Much to my disappointment, Jake got the machete. It was approaching 11 o'clock or so when we started drifting off to sleep. But then John wakes us up frantically. He hears a truck. And we hear it too. I look at my pile of weaponry and realize I can't use it all. I grab the throwing knife and a sheath knife and am the first out of the tent. Later I regret having chosen the sleeping bag closest to the door, but that's another story. Sure enough, a truck is coming up the road towards us. I realize I have a choice, the unknown terror in the trees or the unknown terror in the truck. I slink a little distance into the woods. The other two charge out of the tent, hands full of assorted blades. They brandish them and, with the fury of fear, run at the truck. Its door slowly opens. Luckily for them, it was one of our dads bearing firewood. Someone could have gotten shot. My incident hiking alone as a woman. This happened this past winter. I was 22. It was a bluebird winter day on street. I had my Garmin radio, I was fully prepared, and I had hiked the mountain before. I was having a blast. I had already finished nigh when I encountered a solo male hiker. He was maybe in his mid/late 30s. Now, I had hiked solo and traveled solo many times before this, and I'm used to meeting other solo hikers. This encounter stood out. He started a conversation, normal. But it quickly turned to him berating me about my personal safety as a woman. He said things like, "You never know what a man would do to a pretty young woman if he had the chance. God, I wish you and I were hiking together so I could keep you safe, you never know who's out here," and other variants of this. He kept warning me about the dangers of hiking solo but only ever mentioned the dangers posed by men, and not things like spruce traps or weather conditions. It kept going, and when I tried walking past him, he wouldn't move. I ended up climbing into the snow on the side of the trail and said, "Goodbye. Have a nice hike," while he was still talking to me about who knows what. I met 2 other solo male hikers that day, and they were completely normal and friendly. My friend picked me up from the trailhead, and I immediately told her how uncomfortable the interaction was. I like to give the benefit of the doubt, but I flat out told her, it was weird, and he was creepy. I know the situation made me feel uncomfortable because before checking out, I actually looked for his name and made a mental note of it. I told my friend his name too. It didn't feel safe. Later that night, my gut feeling was confirmed. I had an Instagram follow request. I answered it, thinking maybe someone on the trail lost something or whatever. It was the man. He immediately started hitting on me, so I blocked him. He then texted my phone number, claiming, "Something happened to my Instagram, I don't know why I can't message you. It must be on my end." I then also blocked his number. He must have gotten my information from the logbook. I started solo hiking the ADK fully thinking it was completely safe, that this sort of thing wouldn't happen here or to me, and that I know these woods. I was confident. I still hike solo, but now I don't feel this way when I do. I still fill out my information in the logbook because I do think it's important, but it's unfortunate that now I think about someone stealing my information when I do. Human encounter, was this creepy or normal? I want to share what happened on my very first backpacking trip, as I was thoroughly creeped out and would like to know from more experienced backpackers whether my feelings were justified. On Friday night before Memorial Day, we were at Duffy Lake Trail in Willamette National Forest, Oregon. My boyfriend, along with our 2 dogs, accompanied me on this trip. At the trailhead, a man rode up on an ATV while we were preparing our gear, assuming he lived nearby and had heard our vehicle revving and struggling through the snow on the approach. He warned us that the Forest Service hadn't cleared the trail yet, so there could be many tree falls and snow, which turned out to be true. We wanted to hike and camp at Duffy Lake, but the deeper snow made it hard. I ultimately slipped while crossing a stream and dislocated a finger, so we decided to retrace our steps and camp closer to the vehicle instead of continuing forward, reasoning that the snow would likely deteriorate further rather than improve. We had reset my finger but wanted an easy exit in case it felt worse in the morning. We saw no signs of recent activity on the trail, no tracks in the snow or sounds besides birds. For that reason and because we found a good spot, we made our camp about 20 feet from the trail rather than going further off. We weren't expecting to see anyone. We were about 1.5 miles from the TH. We went to sleep when it got dark around 9:30. Around 11:30, I woke up suddenly and saw light reflecting shadows on our tent. Then I heard footsteps getting closer and the light getting brighter. Since the rainfly was on, we couldn't see outside the tent. Then light shines directly on our tent. Dogs start growling and barking, and my boyfriend calls out, "Hello?" A male voice responds, "Sorry, I was trying to be quiet." The footsteps continued, and I was 90% sure that based on the sound and the behavior of the light, he was alone and moving further into the forest rather than heading towards the trailhead. I call out, "Are you heading in or out?" The man doesn't answer, even though, judging from the footsteps at that moment, he was perpendicular with our tent, not much past it, if at all, and must have heard me, as he would have been closer than when my boyfriend spoke. Footsteps and lights seemed to continue on and disappear, although I spent the rest of the night terrified and imagining that he turned his light off and snuck back quietly to end us. Since we were only 1.5 miles from the TH, reaching where we were by 11:30 means he would have started when it was already dark. The lake, if he intended to camp there, is about 3 miles in. As I didn't sleep the rest of the night, I didn't hear him pass by again coming back out. Finding the trail in the light was already difficult due to the snow, obstacles, and lack of clearing, so attempting it in the dark seems insane. So my question is, was I right to be freaked the duck out, or is this Norma? A buddy and I were on a camping trip in the Poudre Canyon outside Fort Collins, Colorado. It was late in the season, so all of the campgrounds were closed. We found a random spot off of a random road. Both of us have a ton of experience and had camped all over CO and UT, but something about this particular spot was just off. Almost immediately, we found a blanket wrapped around a deceased, skeletal animal. We assumed it was just a pet that someone had thrown out, but it set the mood. We went hiking, climbed up a few hills, and came across an abandoned tent wrapped up in a tree. I was certain we were going to find a body in it, but it was just filled with notebooks and a sleeping bag. We start hiking down the hill and end up walking down the side, which is very steep. As we are traversing down, we are hit with the smell of death. Nestled into a tree, on the side of a very steep hill, is a small towel with something inside of it. We leave it be and hike down. This is probably 200 to 300 feet up the side of a steep hill with the towel in a tree, facing the top of the hill. Clearly intentionally put here. We down some bourbon, build up some courage, and hike back up. Grab a stick, and open up the towel. Inside, a very recently deceased owl. Somehow, someway, someone had ended this owl, wrapped it in a towel, hiked up a steep hill off a random mountain road, and stuck it beside a tree. We started a fire, slammed the bourbon, and got the duck out of there in the morning. Weird man scuttling around on all fours at night. This memory came back to say hi recently, and I thought some of you here might enjoy listening to it. This incident occurred to me just over 2 years ago. I recall it every so often and realize how disastrous this could really have gone. Pre-everything, I worked in a late-night bar in the city, usually finishing up at about 3/4 am or so depending on the night, maybe a little later if the staff stopped up for drinks and chats afterwards. My house was across the river and up a steep hill on the north side and was about a 10 to 15 minute walk, in a small cul-de-sac at the very top of the monster hill. At that time, I had a housemate whom people often confused with me because we looked similar, both shaven-headed and frequently dressed in black. Around this time, she'd been saying that she felt like she'd been being followed by a guy who came into her work. She had, 3 different jobs at the time, so her schedule was all over the place. This is important later. Now, I know some of you will probably say I'm an idiot, and you'd probably be right, but like many bartenders, I used to walk home all the time, usually by myself at these hours. The rent I was paying for my shitty room at the time was extortionate. It didn't have storage or even a ducking door, as were the bills piling up, and I was trying to save whatever I could because I had been hemorrhaging money on taxis, and I'd walked home so many times without major incident that I figured it'd be fine. I am not a very large or particularly fit person, so to say that the odds would not be in my favor in a physical fight would be an understatement. For work, I had this bottle opener/utility tool thing with a small blade on it for cutting the foil on top of bottles. Sometimes on my walk home, I'd hold it in my hand in my pocket to feel a bit safer. Anyway, this particular night, I locked up and set out for home. The place was deserted. I crossed the river and started the trek up the hill. Walking alone at night freaks me out a little, so I always used to power walk up the hill really fast. I'd be exhausted and a ball of sweat afterwards, but I'd be home. I got to the last stretch of the hill, which was a straight shot up to my place. It was a pretty poorly lit area, but I could still see the cars parked at the top. As I was walking up the hill, I saw what I thought was an animal on 4 legs scurry across the road, really low down to the ground and into my turnoff. I thought maybe it was a neighbor's dog and just kept walking. It scurried back out into the driveway across the road, then back into my cul-de-sac. At this point I'm like, oh hell nah, that was some weird looking dog, and I'm pretty sure it was wearing shoes. At this point, it was in the turnoff I needed to take to get home, and I clearly thought, that's not a ducking dog, so I had 2 options: wait alone on the street at 4 a.m. and hope it left, or try to run past this creature that had been moving around on all fours in the dark. Being full of too much beer and not enough sense, I decided to make a run for it. I'd slap myself too, but I can't take my own good advice. Remember the little utility knife I usually carried? Yeah, me neither. Scrambling around desperately in my pocket, I realize I've forgotten it. Furthermore, I haven't broken pace at all, so I'm literally just around the corner from the turnoff. I'm already sweaty and shaky from the long climb and just pretty ducking done. All I could find in my jacket was a bottle of perfume, one of those made out of chunky glass in the shape of a torso. I fish it out and hold it in my fist in case things take a turn for the worst. Use it as mace, you say? Nah. I'm going to break a ducking nose with this. I reached the corner, and there was nothing there. Empty path, not a peep, nothing. I figure maybe he was just on drugs or something and went for a run around in the field that led onto my lane. The gate was right by the corner. I walk on, my house 3 doors away, thinking I'm in the clear when this dude literally just strides out of the shadows, straight towards me. I don't know how the duck he managed to conceal himself so well, but it scared the shit out of me. I actually surprised myself, because I lunged at him shouting Jesus Christ, swinging the thick bit of the bottle down in my fist towards his nose. The blow didn't connect, likely because I scared him as well. He saw a glint of something in my hand, staggered backward, and stared at me with wide eyes, repeatedly saying, I'm like a deer caught in the headlights. I looked him in the face and said, "What the duck, man?" and walked to my house, keeping an eye on him, but he just wandered off. I got inside and told my housemate about what happened. She went white when I described him, as it matched very closely the description of the person who'd been stalking and making unwanted romantic gestures toward her while she was at work. We reckon that this was the same guy, and he must have been watching her from afar but confused me for her, like everyone else, and thought it'd be her coming home at that time. It makes my skin crawl to think we were being watched and tracked without either of us realizing. His reaction must have been when he realized he had the wrong mark, and I for one would happily smash his creepy face in with a perfume bottle. Also, for anyone wondering, she'd tried reporting this guy's behavior before, but surprise surprise, nothing could be done because he technically hadn't done anything. We just notified our other housemate, made sure the house was locked up like Alcatraz, and kept communication open. Never saw or heard of him after that night, though. It was Labor Day weekend in the Adirondacks. My friend and I set up our hammocks and went away from camp to cook our meals, fill up water, and stash our bear canisters. When we returned, a family had set up their tent right in the middle of our site, in between our hammocks. As it was getting dark and they had small kids, we didn't really protest much since they said they would be leaving in the morning. Once my friend and I settled into our hammocks to get some sleep, midnight for hikers and all, we smelled the family cooking dinner. Mind you, it's a very busy bear area, and there are huge signs saying not to eat at camp, not to cook after dark, etc. We hear one of the kids screaming because a bear had come up and stolen their food, and the dad is now yelling for us to help him as he continues to eat and leave their food sprawled everywhere. I crawl out of my hammock and proceed to yell at him for creating this mess. Basically I was like, "You want me to protect you and your family when you are the ones who put me and my friend in danger?" Plus, they didn't have a bear canister even though it's required. My friend and I ended up packing up our gear and stealth camping elsewhere that night. A visitor from the forest. A few years back, I worked with a biologist group, which entailed hard, long days collecting data in the boreal forest. We traveled around a lot and got to see many different areas. We ended up in a dark, creepy area with huge trees. Anyways, we would usually set up camp in either campsites or other areas in the bush. We usually would stay in a camp for a week or so to be able to cover all the spots we needed to hit for research. My group and I would each have our tent set up and pegged down in the area we chose to stay in. One of my coworkers asked if anyone had left their tents after one of my first nights there. None of us had left our tents, and she then told us that she heard something in our campsite but was too afraid to call out. She also was not sure if it had been a person or something else. This didn't bother me too much at the time, as I thought an animal must have decided to walk through the campsite. Furthermore, the next night came around after an exhausting day. We left our campsite untouched during the day and settled in for the night. In the middle of the night, I had a very strange dream. I dreamt that things from the forest had come inside the storm flaps of my tent and were whispering weird things to me through the tent screening right beside my head. It was a very disturbing, weird dream where I had felt half awake. I commonly have dreams where I sometimes will be half awake, so my actual surroundings become a part of the dream. This is what that dream felt like. The next morning, after waking up, things started to get weird. I got dressed and got out of my tent to find that about 3/4 of my tent pegs had been ripped out of the ground and were missing. Furthermore, the side of the tent I had not been using the zipper entrance to, because it was facing the forest, had been completely unzipped. So this made me realize that this dream I had the night before was in fact not a dream. But something had taken pegs out of the ground of my tent, unzipped the side of it facing the forest, and was whispering to me through the screen. It was safe to say I slept in the locked truck the nights after that. It shook me up, and my coworkers were also extremely creeped out. Maybe some ducked up person went through our campsite to come whisper to me at night? I don't know, but I am sure as hell never going back there. A man stalks/chases me on a secluded running path until I can hide and call the police. I live in a large city in the US. Like many people, I have taken it on myself to try and get back in shape during the new year, so I've recently gotten into running and lifting 5 days a week. Yesterday was a run day for me. I usually start at my apartment and cross over to this long park that runs along the river close to my apartment. The park is filled with sports fields, tennis courts, and many runners along the pathway. I've been going 2 to 3 times a week for just over a month. During my run last night, I was engrossed in listening to a podcast and decided to venture a bit further than my usual distance. To this longer stretch where the park ends for like half a mile before it picks back up, kind of an area where they park equipment. Many people avoid this area because it is not waterfront and is considered unattractive. I decided to run to the end of this area before circling back home. As I'm running, I see a man 200 or so feet ahead of me walking in my direction. Not unusual at all. I've passed like 40 people already, but this area is empty except for him and me, as most people circle back. Still, I ride my bike here to commute for work and have never gotten weird vibes. I'm also an average built man and feel pretty secure most places in my relatively safe neighborhood. I continue running while listening to my podcast when I notice that the man's path is directly in line with mine. If I keep going for another 150 feet, I would run into him. Therefore, I shift to the other side of the path, about 10 feet away, and keep running without paying attention. I look back up, and he's in my path again. Still no alarms. Maybe he shifted to get out of my way, and we did that thing where we both went, so I shift back to the side I started on. I watch him, he shifts to my side. I'm thinking this guy is ducking with me. I'm 50 feet away, and between there and 20 feet, I keep shifting, more and more quickly. He follows me exactly to the point he is sidestepping instead of moving forward, waiting for me to reach him. At this point I take his presence in. He is 6 feet 3 inches at the shortest, in jeans and a black hoodie with the hood up. I can't really make out his face due to a street light behind him casting a shadow. I begin to realize, oh duck. I come to a stop and go to pull my headphones out and begin the sentence, what the duck, man? I get to what the F, when he raises both arms above his head and begins to scream at me. No legible words I can hear over my podcast. I do notice he has something long and white/beige in his hands. At this point I begin to backtrack, keeping eyes on him. All of a sudden, he dashes towards me, running with his arms stretched out to grab me. I turn and hightail it the other way. It should be known I am not in the best of shape. I've had numerous injuries requiring surgeries, and I've just done about 75% of my intended run for the night, but I've never run faster. He kept pace and closed much of the distance, but when we started going slightly uphill, I continued to make ground. We came to a fork in the path after about a minute of this. The two paths circled around a fenced-in area that contained construction vehicles, mowers, etc. I made it look like I was going one way, and at the last moment, I dashed the other way. The paths kind of made a circle, so I was able to get far enough ahead to where he couldn't see me via the fence and bushes, and when I felt like it was my chance, I dove into a bush, clawed my way under the fence, and crawled through the space and out the other side of the fence. He kept looking for me in the bushes, prowling back and forth, and finally saw me on the other side of the enclosure. At this point I was already on the phone with the police trying to get help as I gulped down breaths of air. I was also warning runners. He eventually just followed my pace on the opposite side of the fence. He kept ducking into darker areas around the enclosure, and eventually I lost sight of him. I began getting worried again and kept wandering around, warning people while I waited on the cops. After about 15 minutes of not seeing him, I pieced the duck out of there as the cops said they were close. The jog home was horrible, and any time a runner passed me, I would have a mini panic attack. I was in shock and running off adrenaline the remainder of the night. I'm not really sure what happened or what was going on. It felt like it was from a movie. Today I checked the Citizen app and Twitter to see if anything had happened, and I'm not sure if it's related. It most likely isn't, but 5 hours after I called the cops, they pulled the body of a man out of the river a mile or two downriver from where the attempted attack occurred. My scary camping/stranger experience. Over this past summer I was camping with a couple of longtime family friends, Bill and Lauren. But throughout the whole previous summer, Bill, Lauren, their kids, and I went camping at their campsite. Also with us were Lauren's twin sister, Ashley, and her husband, Tom, and their kids. We typically visited there every weekend when the weather was favorable, but I will only discuss the day on which I experienced a frightening encounter. To start from the beginning of the day, we all arrived at the campsite about noon. We had some fun while swimming in the pond that the campgrounds had, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched from the distance beyond the tree lines. However, I ultimately chose not to dwell on it excessively, as I was enjoying myself while swimming in the warm Ohio weather. If you live in Ohio or have ever spent a full summer day in it, you will understand how the weather patterns can be real stupid at times, but it doesn't get as hot as it does in other states that get it real bad, though. We all agreed to leave the water to dry off, as we planned to cook some meat on a grill prior to the start of Game 7 between the Cavaliers and the Warriors. While looking near the pathway to the camper where Bill, Lauren, their kids, and I were staying, I noticed a man standing and looking in our direction. When he realized I saw him, he ran into the trees. This initially freaked me out, but I chose not to tell Bill, Lauren, Tom, or Ashley. So we ended up grilling some steak and some other cow meat. We ended up getting a lot of meat because Tom works at a factory that does a lot with putting all the meats in the packages, so he ended up bringing some of it with him to cook. We finished dining around 6:30 p.m., and since the game did not commence until 7 p.m., I believe we all proceeded to Bill and Lauren's camper to initiate a bonfire. And we just talked until the game was on, and we listened to it on Tom's phone since we didn't have a TV with cable. None of us went to bed until a little after 11 p.m. because we stayed up to see who won, and as you all know, the Cavs sadly won. So we all went to bed. I stayed up until about 11:30 because I like being alone for a little bit before going to bed, so I watched the fire for a little bit. Before I went to bed, I put out the fire so nothing really happens. I had to sleep outside in a tent because Bill and Lauren's camper was too small for another person. So I ended up falling asleep when I got into the tent. I awakened approximately at 2 a.m. due to the suspicion that I heard a noise, as I am a very light sleeper. After a few seconds of the disorienting feeling that comes when you first wake up, I realized the fire was going again. I then texted Lauren to ask if she was outside and had restarted the fire, or if Bill or any of the kids had done it. She replied no and thought I was still awake. I only sent her this because I saw someone standing near the fire. When we both responded that it wasn't us, we heard a maniacal laugh. So Lauren called 911 to get the cops to come, and I didn't really know what to do because I didn't know whether the person had a weapon or not, so I decided just to try and wait until the cops showed up. Unfortunately, the person outside began to approach my tent, leaving me vulnerable, and I understand what you might be thinking. Why didn't I just run away when I had the chance? For one, I think the person would have gotten to me before I even made it out of the tent because of how loud the zipper was. When the person attempted to unzip the tent door, I seized the opportunity to kick him in the head as he reached for the zipper. Fortunately, my kick knocked the person back, causing him to stumble down the hill where I had set up the tent. Luckily, I had a flashlight with me, so I shined the light at the person and found out that it was the man I saw earlier that day. He started to charge at me, and luckily I took some karate classes, so I defended myself to the best I could. When I went to kick the man, he grabbed my foot and threw me to the ground, and luckily we could hear the cops' sirens coming. The man decided to run into the wooded area. I ended up telling the cops everything that happened, but I'm unsure whether they decided to search for the man in the woods and if they found him. Turns out he was just a creepy homeless man that was living near the woods. I still try to understand why he chose me over all the other people at the campsite. I'm just glad that my anxiety didn't kick in. So creepy, man. I just hope that we never meet again. Man, I have some stories. Here's a couple of odd ones. My friends and I frequented a shelter out in the Green Mountains in VT years ago that wasn't too far from the trailhead. It was a great spot to introduce new hikers to backpacking because they didn't need to buy a ton of gear. It was a rustic cabin with a wood stove in it. We'd frequently see other campers there due to its proximity to the parking lot and the fact that it was just a quick jaunt off the long trail. Sometimes even high school kids sneak out there to drink beers and stuff. The only guy who ever really stood out, though, was this older gentleman who rolled up with a rolling suitcase and worn-out tennis shoes. Now I know I said this place is close to a trailhead, but it's not that close, where you'd want to drag a suitcase out there. But we just introduced ourselves and cleared some space for him in the cabin and went on with our night. He was really chatty and told us all about why he was there, which apparently was to meet someone he had met at a different shelter in NH a few weeks earlier. But he didn't know this person's name or when they would be there, so he was just going to stay at this shelter until they crossed paths again. And he was 100% sure that they would be there, despite appearing to have no evidence whatsoever to support that belief. So that was weird. But it got weirder. Throughout the night he proceeded to ask us the weirdest questions, including: what is science? What are sheep for? How do you feel about Hitler? Needless to say, We didn't sleep too heavily that night. The dude seemed mostly harmless, but he was just too weird, and he had an extra creepy way of speaking to our female companions. And then the next day he just up and left. Got up in the morning, said he thought he'd find his friend further up the trail, and wandered off. Strange as hell. This next story is short and sweet, which is an intentional pun, by the way. I was coming down from South Twin and the White Mountains in NH, heading towards North Twin, and it was a warm summer day, and I passed and I'm really not trying to be rude here, it's just part of the story, very large man, with no gear at all, in a fleece pullover, jeans, and again, tennis shoes, just powering uphill with a plastic shopping bag full of Ben & Jerry's ice cream pints that appeared to be melting in the heat. I don't know where he was heading, but he was already a good 4 miles in and had made 3 water crossings with his bag of ice cream. Also strange as hell. A strange man came through our window, Death Valley Ranch. My husband, 2 children, 4 and 8, and I were sleeping in our room at Death Valley National Park a couple nights ago, and a stranger came through our cottage bedroom window. I have truly never been more scared in my whole life. I woke up to him flinging the curtain open and shining his cell phone flashlight in my face. My bed was the one directly next to the window. My 4-year-old daughter was in the bed with me. The intruder appeared to be in his 20s and seemed very agitated, though not overly aggressive, if that makes sense. He said he was looking for his girlfriend. My husband shot out of the other bed and ran up to the window and chased him away before he was able to come all the way inside. I was so shaken up, and of course we had no cell service to call 911. We called the front desk, and they said they were sending security over. Security never came. Nobody even called back to verify on us. Needless to say, we were up all night and unable to sleep. When it was daylight the next day, we saw that the window screen had been removed and thrown to the ground. We took a photo and went to the front desk to show them. There was probably a shift change, but nobody knew what we were talking about when we mentioned the break-in last night. They mentioned they could relocate us to a different cottage, but honestly, that did not improve my feelings at all. If you have never seen them, the ranch at Death Valley has these newer cottages that have a living room and a separate bedroom. I think maybe we were chosen for this intrusion because we were sleeping with the bedroom window open a bit for fresh air. The living room windows were closed and had not been tampered with. Maybe I am out of line here, but I'm really upset with the way the hotel handled what seems like a major security incident. The hotel failed to arrange a visit from security, did not contact any other authorities, and did not even reinstall the window screen before our departure the following day. All that was offered was an opportunity to move to a different cottage. Just putting this out there for anyone considering this as a lodging option: don't sleep with your windows open. Pro tip for the gents: if you're chatting/socializing with a woman in an outdoorsy context, avoid asking about her plans or the details of her trip. If you're chatting with someone you've crossed paths with while camping, hiking, backpacking, etc., it seems natural for the small talk to gravitate toward completely innocent/casual questions about plans. You know where someone is camping, how long they're staying, where they're going next, and if they're alone or with others. For guys, you probably don't think twice about it and have zero ill intentions behind it, but please be aware that for women, being on the receiving end of those types of questions can raise some subconscious hackles. A safety tip often shared among outdoorsy women is to be vague or avoidant when asked those kinds of questions, and even to go out of their way to never admit that they're alone. Dudes can help us out by not asking those types of questions in the first place. As a solo outdoors woman, I cross paths with/chat with strange men in the forest on an extremely regular basis. I never assume ill intentions unless given some reason to do so, and, side note, like 99.5% of all my wild dude encounters have been perfectly fine and uneventful. However, while I was through hiking the I encountered another hiker, an older and crotchety man, who frequently asked where I planned to camp and coincidentally ended up at the same location, making me a captive audience for his unwanted attention. It took me a while to recognize the pattern. Ever since then, questions like that automatically make me somewhat uneasy, especially since far too many outdoorsy women report similar experiences. I still don't assume that a guy asking personal questions means he has any bad intentions, but now I have to actively remind myself of that when it happens in order to avoid feeling somewhat anxious or paranoid over it. As I said, it's a natural part of conversation, but if you've never had personal cause to think more deeply about it, it's also natural to be oblivious to the implications. Hi folks, share your tales of crazy/strange/dangerous stuff you've seen others do, or you've done yourself, in the backcountry. Here's one of mine. A family of 4 camped at the site next to us in a national park this summer. They placed one massive tarp, approximately 12x12, under their 3 tents and laid another tarp over their entire campsite, which made us think their tents resembled a construction site with covered mounds of bricks or dirt when we arrived. The expanse of the under tarp pooled rainwater like ponds, and in trying to get the top tarp off at bedtime to clamber into their tents, water that had gathered in the folds got everywhere. The same family proceeded to start cooking breakfast and then left 2 pots of semi-cooked food, all their condiments, and their other groceries just sitting on their table, driving off to town. In bear country. We put their stuff into their bear box for them. Their dubious attempts at camp food seemed to have driven them to seek pancakes in civilization. All in the Smoky Mountains of Appalachia, East Tennessee. I observed a row of torches, or objects resembling them, ascending the mountain and then descending hours later in the distance, approximately 300 yards away, with around 15 in total. I still have no idea what that was. It was in a very remote area. My brother and his friend Bubba were mudding near those same foothills, and when they turned around on the trail, someone had freshly cut down a tree across the road behind them, fresh wood chips from a saw. They were in a lifted jeep and were able to crawl over it without stopping long, but it looked a lot like someone was trying to trap them back there. While hunting, in a clearing heading down into a holler, I saw hundreds or maybe thousands of scattered bones, some fresh and some half buried that had obviously been there a while. The clearing was maybe 30 yards times 10 yards, and you pretty near couldn't walk in it without stepping on a bone. I assumed the bones were from a panther, since they sometimes take all their kills to one spot to hide and eat, so I marked the location in my GPS, identified as many animals as I could, mostly deer, looked for antlers, and moved on. A few days later I went back with a friend to show her, and the clearing was completely empty. The same clearing at the same waypoint was completely empty, with not a single bone in sight and no tracks of any kind, whether animal or human. Weirdest shit I've ever personally experienced. I still wonder if I was somehow out of my mind at the time. Although this phenomenon isn't really related to cryptids or haints, I have experienced squirrels making such loud noises while hunting that I was convinced they were bears, elk, or big bucks. Conversely, I've also had bears walk through dry fallen leaves during the fall hunt without making a sound until they were right in front of my blind. It's weird how quiet such a large animal can be when they want. I was stalked in the woods, but I think I'm grateful for my stalker. I used to love hiking and camping by myself. I had a few odd moments as a single woman traveling alone, but most of my experiences were positive overall. I grew up in the deep south, so sometimes I get this overwhelming need to get out of the city and spend time alone. On this particular occasion, I road tripped for 2 days and went to a very remote location. I got into my head that I was going to complete an obscure 15-mile hike in the middle of nowhere. The trailhead was a little off the beaten path and hard to get to by car, so I decided to park, hike 4 miles and camp, and then set off early the next day to complete the route. When I stopped at the nearest town, a man asked what my plans were. I didn't give it much thought, but I shared my general plans with him. He tensed up a little and asked if it was a good idea to spend time alone like that in such an isolated location. I laughed, recalling my experiences with much sketchier adventures, and assured him that I was fine. To this day, something about this interaction seems off to me. He was very old, though, so there was no way he followed me. The hike to the general area where the trailhead began was absolutely gorgeous. I was feeling the high that comes with isolation and stopped paying much attention to the area around me. It didn't strike me to check the location. I set up camp pretty early, which gave me time to explore. I was giddy as I waded through a small creek like a child. I heard a tree branch snap, but I didn't think much of it until I saw a tiny bit of movement out of the corner of my eye. I paused, expecting to see some animal, but when I scanned the tree line, everything was still. Then, I saw a tiny piece of fabric float in the wind and barely made out the shape of a human. I froze and watched closely, letting my eyes adjust to the figure in the distance. I had just about convinced myself I had gone crazy. I took a step forward, ready to find a reasonable explanation, when all of a sudden a man darted to the north. He ran a few strides and then disappeared into the woods. I felt sick. I had literally thought about getting naked just moments before because I was convinced I was totally alone. At that point I had a choice to make. It was getting dark. By the time I packed up camp, it would arguably be dangerous to hike back to the car. The trail wasn't bad, and I'm an experienced hiker, but I was unfamiliar with the terrain. On the other hand, someone had been watching me, and I hadn't told anyone back home where I was staying. I generally trust that folks aren't dangerous and assumed he was a curious local who didn't have bad intentions. It had definitely been a man. I know that for certain, and it will become important later in this story. He was at least 6 feet, and I could tell by the way he ran. After some deliberation, I decided to stay. I was exhausted and kept telling myself the fear was in my head. I did pull out my pepper spray, though. I stayed up for a while reading with a lantern, but I finally turned my lights out and got settled in. When I was drifting off, something woke me up, though. I'm not really sure what it was, but I somehow got this overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone. Something also told me not to turn my lantern on. My logic was that, if I was being stalked, it'd be better not to scare them off. I very slowly got my shoes on and crawled out of my tent. I started studying the tree line with slow and careful precision, but it was too dark to make anything out. I felt something, though. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I wasn't alone. "You have to leave," a voice whispered from behind me. I spun around quickly and felt a scream get stuck in my throat. A woman was crouched at the edge of the clearing, watching me. I knew it was a woman because she had on some kind of nightgown, which means the man I saw earlier was somewhere unseen, possibly watching this interaction. "You have to leave," she said louder. This time I screamed. I screamed and stumbled back. Somehow I had enough sense to grab my smaller pack before I took off toward my car, which was miles away. I had a hat with a tiny light on it, but otherwise I was stumbling in the dark, praying I was on the right path. I was also convinced that at any moment I was going to get snatched. Thank God I had my keys in my bag. I somehow made it to my car. I'm fairly certain that was my PR, and I've never felt so much relief to get inside my beat-up little clunker. I locked the doors and let out a breath of relief when my car turned on. I half expected it to be dead. I drove for an hour until my cell service was solid enough to find a hostel-style compound nearby. It was the first time in my life I was grateful to be in a shared dorm, because I would rather not be alone. It was late when I got in, so I didn't talk to anyone until the next morning when I finally made friends with a few other hikers and spilled my story. They listened in horror as I cried out of fear. Everyone was absolutely stunned except the owner of the motel hostel compound thing, who just kind of shrugged. "There's only one family in that area. I think I know who that woman would be, and I promise she's very harmless," the owner noted. "Then why?" I asked. "Why did she sneak into my campsite? She had to have been stalking me. I didn't have a fire going or anything." He considered this. "I don't know, but I suspect she had a reason." Armed with a new cohort of hiker friends, we went back to my campsite later that morning. I had left thousands of dollars worth of food and gear. This next part is the creepiest. My tent was still up, but all of my stuff had been gone through. However, it wasn't ransacked. In fact, everything looked neat and laid out perfectly, like someone knew I'd come back. Nothing was missing. I packed everything up as my new hiker friends and I proposed different theories to explain what had happened. Before I left, I glanced around the tree line to see if I was still being watched. I didn't see anything, but just in case someone was watching, I mouthed "thank you" and tipped my hat. I've turned this over a million times in my head and have considered every option. At best, I think someone was trying to catch a glimpse of me changing or something. I don't want to think of the worst case scenario. Still, I can't shake the feeling that the woman I saw wasn't there to hurt or scare me. I have an overwhelming feeling she knew something I didn't, and I knew I had to get out. Naked man in the woods. I am a huge fan of hiking and taking walks in the woods. I only go alone when I am in the woods near my home. However, on this day, I was not alone. I was with my friend Lars on a walk about 3 hours from my house. We were planning on traveling around and staying at motels in the meantime. That day we decided to take a walk in a popular area for people who like to walk in the woods like me. The catch was that this woods was freaking huge, not really bad to us though. We were thrilled. There wasn't much, it was pretty. We escaped the crowd, but every now and then we would see someone walking by. We walked for a while until we got to this spot, not too different from the rest, except for one thing. Nobody else was around in the section, that's why I and Lars took this turn. The other turn had a few people. After a while of walking down this path, we spotted a naked man. We gave each other the look and turned around. The man was slightly off path, bent over and looking at something. As I and Lars were walking back, talking about the strange man, I heard a voice behind me. I turned to see the man. He was talking to us about the bug he picked up. I got a good look at him. He was a bit tall, nothing crazy, bald with a few brown hairs beginning to grow, but completely naked. I flashed the man a smile and sped up. We got out of that place as fast as we could. Once we got to the car, we kind of laughed. Yes, it was creepy, but more weirdly funny. The car ride was nothing, so skip to the motel. As we are checking in at the motel, we see the man walk in. He was a bit hard to recognize considering the fact that now he had clothes, just torn up clothes. He waited behind us in line. Good thing we were almost done checking in because as soon as we did, we went right to our room and locked it with no thought. Now it was definitely creepy. Was he following us, or was it a coincidence? We both decided we weren't going to stay at this hotel for more than a night. Heck, I wouldn't want to stay one night if it weren't for Lars telling me it's okay. That night Lars wanted to go outside for a cigarette. I don't smoke, but no way was I going to stay in this room alone. I followed him outside, and we chatted for a bit. After a few minutes, I saw the guy walk out of the doors. Lars put out his cigarette and began to walk inside, but before we got in, the guy pulled out what was probably a knife or something else sharp. It was dark, I could barely see, and started carving through his sleeve and arm. I saw liquid trickling to the ground and immediately knew it was blood. I rushed into the lobby, and Lars got the idea and followed. We alerted the staff, but by the time they got someone to come out, he was gone. To this day I still have so many questions. Did he follow us? Why was he naked? Why was he doing that to himself? I will probably never know the answer, but honestly I am still spooked. I don't know what I will do if I see him again, but I hope I don't have to think about that. I remember I went camping and did shrooms with friends. The location was in the San Gabriel Mountains in California. Prior to doing shrooms, our camping spot had dead animals that appeared to have been shot. There were also broken beer bottles and a pentagram etched in a log. It was our first time here since our original spot was at capacity. We drove around all night trying to locate an alternative camping spot. So after finding a spot, settling in, and popping shrooms, before the high kicked in, we noticed several cop cars and an ambulance circling the campgrounds. We walked over to look, and they had forensic markers where a body was most likely found. This was in broad daylight and just down the road? I was thinking to myself, just ducking great, man. I tried to keep cool, as I was the more experienced camper of the group. As the shrooms kicked in, paranoia set in. It was the worst trip ever. I thought all my friends, my girlfriend, and my brother were going to end up victims of the crime scene we just witnessed. The shrooms we took were extremely potent, making it clear that everyone was experiencing a strong high. The people across from us started to stare, making it an even worse trip. At the peak of my high, I experienced ego death, where I began questioning my existence. I'm a rookie, I know, lol, and as the sky got darker, I felt like I lost all my friends and began thinking the worst. They all took off and ventured into the mountains. I couldn't move as the paranoia crippled me. Furthermore, we weren't far from a mountain highway, so motorcycles driving by sounded frightening as hell. Finally, after many hours, the high started to fade, and everyone made it back okay. None of us were harmed, fortunately. I had a seriously bad trip, though, given the eerie circumstances of the area. I felt like hell but was relieved we made it out okay. Lesson of the story: never take psychedelics if you don't feel 100% safe in your environment. Take time to walk around and get a sense of the area. Engage in small talk with nearby campers to assess the conditions and overall vibe of the area. I won't camp there ever again. Lol. Creepy in a kind of funny way. About 7 years ago my friend and I were walking down the railroad tracks outside of Eugene, Oregon. We went pretty far because eventually we were surrounded by nothing but forest. Not a car, road, or house in sight. We kept walking when we noticed a figure in the distance moving in our direction. It was a man in his early 20s on a bicycle riding down an old, rarely used, overgrown dirt road. As he got closer I began feeling uneasy. So we stepped off the tracks and tried to make ourselves less visible without blatantly hiding. He got to right about where we were. He stopped about 15 feet away from us. He was wearing a black hoodie, knee-high socks, and a thong. Yes, a thong. No pants. He looked at the ground and looked ahead. Never once looking in our direction. Then he began building up his momentum again and took off down the road. We were pretty weirded out by the incident and figured it would be best to continue our course, as we didn't want to follow the trajectory of the thing the cyclist was on. We walked for another 20-ish minutes when we saw another figure in the distance. It was another man on a bike with a black hoodie, knee-high socks, and a thong. This guy was blonde, though. The other had dark hair. He was riding across the road but stopped in the center and stared at us. At this point we decided the best move would be to go back to my buddy's house because we didn't want to run into any more of these individuals. So there it is. Definitely not the weirdest/creepiest thing I've ever experienced, but I'd certainly categorize it as one of them. About a year ago, my GF and I were on a trail to Lamoille Lake in northern Nevada. It's about 1.5 miles each way, I think, and usually pretty well populated. It was that day as well. There were at least a handful of people on the trail here and there and plenty down at the trailhead parking lot, and it was otherwise a totally normal sunny day. We started heading back down as evening approached, not wanting to be out when it got dark, as there is no cell service up there for quite a distance, and it was just an afternoon weekend hike. We started down the trail, and I got the slightest hint of a bad feeling, like we definitely needed to get back to our car before it got dark. I think that's generally just common sense and doesn't need to be prompted by a sixth sense or anything. Still, I kept an eye out as we went. Weirdly, absolutely nothing happened until we were maybe 300 yards from the parking lot. The trees had largely been left behind as we descended in elevation, and bushes, large and small, were there instead. There was a creek that ran through to our right. Ahead of us by maybe 50 yards was a lone woman and her medium-sized dog on a leash. I had my head on a swivel the whole way down because I was just trying to keep an eye out and make sure that hint of a bad feeling didn't amount to anything. I was also carrying. This woman was ahead of us by about the same distance for a good while down the trail, and I felt somewhat responsible for her safety as well, if anything strange were to happen. Mountain lions are known to live higher up in those mountains, the Rubies, and she was pretty much in sight the whole time. So, I was trying to help keep an eye out for her too. As we're walking, I and the GF both hear what seemed like a big boulder sliding and grating along a stone surface. It lasted a few seconds, and we were both looking at the rocky slope maybe 600 yards to our left. I am a bad judge of distance, but I think that might be close, fully expecting to see a landslide of some sort. But there was nothing, and daylight was still good enough that I think if there was something to see on that front, we would have seen it. I immediately looked to the lady ahead of us, and just a second later, she and her dog started booking it. Right as they did this, a herd of deer came sprinting out of the bushes away from the boulder sound. It must have been closer than it sounded. They ran across the creek and kept going to our right. After pausing for a second to discuss what that weird sound might have been, we hurried along as well, and I drew my gun. We passed the same little section where the lady was when she took off, and thankfully nothing happened. We didn't hear or see anything in those bushes, though I'm not surprised. A whole herd of deer was in there, and we couldn't see them until they ran out, despite being at a higher elevation at the time. We quickly made it back to the parking lot, and I put my gun back in the holster. It felt safer getting back to the pavement for some reason. We caught up with the woman and the dog. She was catching her breath and pacing a little. We asked if she heard that weird sound, and she said she heard the loud, boulder-y sound, and then off to her left directly close by, right where the deer came running from, she distinctly heard a big, low growl, after the boulder sound, and then she heard the deer coming and ran to get out of the way. The deer probably would have run right into her if she hadn't moved. From a vantage point above and behind, I observed the deer come out onto the trail right where she had been just a second earlier, only a minute or two before. We determined it may have been a mountain lion. I'm all for believing that, but I still have two questions. 1. Why did I get the feeling we needed to leave, even subtly, around 45 minutes before anything strange happened? 2. Why/how did whatever it was make a big sound of a boulder scraping along, not tumbling, but sliding, very different sounds, and then there was a clear growl heard by the woman, but not by us. I believe this suggests that something was definitely in those bushes, but I am quite confused about the larger sound. I doubt the same animal made a huge boulder scraping sound. It sounded like it was sliding down the mountainside. The deer did not run, but then the same creature made a normal growl from the same location, and I wonder if that was what scared the deer away. I don't know what I believe about this, but it was certainly a strange experience. Chase through the woods. Female 17. Now, I would like to start this off by saying that most consider me an intimidating person by nature. My close friends don't really believe that, but they know I'm serious in certain situations, whether it's telling someone to duck off or, as much as I hate to admit it, getting physical with someone. I've never really had someone approach me in public thinking of getting the best of me, if that makes sense. About half a year ago, I was at my previous house rolling some small joints with my girlfriend. I live somewhat in the middle of nowhere, and there are many trees in my area, and they're also in my backyard. It's larger than a grove but smaller than a forest. There's wildlife there, though. My girlfriend and I hadn't smoked much that day, and we were home alone, and seeing as we could do anything we wanted, we decided, duck yeah, baby. Let's smoke these while taking a bit of a nature walk and have an orgy with some ducking forest fairies or something. It seemed like an absolutely amazing idea at the time. My girlfriend sat next to me while I rolled the harvested God's gift into the paper. We were talking about random shit and listening to heavy metal as I focused on rolling those sweet spliffs. Can I mention those joints were absolute pearls? Anyways. I had finished rolling, and we decided to finally leave my house and walk into the plain woods, which at the time had never been intimidating to me or anyone I'd been in there with unless they were just major pussies by nature or had some anxiety issues. I have the joints in my pocket, we leave. We're walking through my backyard toward one of the many trails near my place. I should also mention that it was summer, so at 7 p.m., it wouldn't get completely dark for another 2.5 to 3 hours. We light up, and for about an hour or so, it's fine. We're on the second joint, just walking along the paths. We see this big ass, flat rock, like a pancake boulder. We're like, hell yeah. And we sit on it and lie down. The two of us sit for a while like that, holding hands, skewed, and passing the joint between us. Maybe 30 minutes pass, and we start hearing noises. I'd like to mention by this point the sun will start to set soon, maybe in another 30 minutes. We're obviously really freaked out by the sounds. At the time we just looked at each other and internally blamed it on the weed making us a little paranoid. There was wildlife in this forest, as I'd mentioned. We were trespassing in their backyard, so why should we mind a cute bunny family making their way downtown? After a while of silence, we hear a noise that we both know damn well isn't an animal. Now that I think about it, it sounded like someone running something sharp against a solid but jagged surface. Like a rock. It was pretty far away, but somehow it was loud enough that we heard it. It was faint, though. We look at each other and immediately sit up. We don't see anything. I stand up and urge her to do so as well. This most definitely wasn't the forest fairies we had planned on having an orgy with. We stand for a minute or so, and then we hear a big snap, like a tree branch getting stepped on with a ton of force, and then fast footsteps. Like some dude is sprinting. I freak out and go into panic mode, as I'm weary to admit. And of course, we were deep into these woods, and I urged my girlfriend Kimber to run as fast as all shit towards my house. Now, Kimber and I aren't necessarily sporty people. We were more of the academic bunch our whole lives. Although we weren't completely out of shape, it would have been much easier for us if we had participated in cross-country or track. Kimber runs in front of me and is a little farther ahead. We aren't on trails at this point, and twigs and leaves are completely shredding our faces, necks, legs, and arms. We hear this person who's running, obviously running after us, start a hootin' and hollerin' like some damn inbred from the hills have eyes or something. That makes us shit bricks, obviously, and we run faster. We're sprinting and huffing and puffing like a fat kid during the mile or something. The person is unfortunately closer at this point, and I look back, and I see him. He's an older guy, maybe 40 years old, give or take. His hair is long and thin as shit, and he's scraggly looking. This makes me shit pure cement, of course. I yell at Kimber to hurry, and she does. I look behind me again, and he's somehow gaining on us. Kimber makes a turn, and I recognize it as being straight to my house. The turn was abrupt, and I thank Jesus because the guy must have been too close to process the turn. We turn and see the lights of my house in the almost darkness. Seeing this mother duck and beacon of hope makes us run harder. The guy can't be seen, and we make it into my cleared backyard. My girlfriend runs up my back porch steps and rips the sliding door open, letting me in and then locking it. She slams the blinds down to cover the door, and we make sure all the doors and windows are locked. I feel my back pocket for my phone and realize that of ducking course it's somewhere in those damn trees. My girlfriend's phone is dead. No house phone because who the duck has those these days? It was a burden at the time. My girlfriend starts having a panic/anxiety attack. I'm not sure what it was. I plug her phone in for her, and it starts charging. I turn all the lights off except for those by our doors. I saw no sign of that man for the rest of the night and for the rest of the time I lived there. Her phone charged, and we called the cops, and they surveyed the area but found nothing. It was terrifying for me, and I can only assume it was worse for my girlfriend, who has anxiety. Stalker in the woods. This encounter actually happened to my best friend a couple of months ago, and when she told me about it, it sounded like something out of a horror movie. I'm sharing this with her permission. Some background info: best friend's name is Kylie. Kylie goes to school about 3 hours away from home, and it's just her and her mom that live together in a condo when she's home visiting, meaning her mom is alone in their condo most of the time. Their small condo has a second-story balcony over the garage, and it overlooks a wooded area if you're standing outside on the balcony. So one night Kylie's mom was sitting on the couch watching TV, and she got up to let their Yorkie out onto the balcony for some fresh air. When she sits down, she gets a text message saying, "Could you please get your dog to stop barking?" She thought the message was odd but assumed it was from a neighbor, so she responded, "Sorry about that. I let Danny, the complex owner, know you complained." Now everyone who lives in the complex would know who Danny is. They're all pretty close, and it's a small neighborhood. The random number responds, "Who's Danny?" So Kylie's mom gets a weird feeling and asks the number to leave her alone. He responds again, "I don't really like the TV show you're watching. Would you mind changing it?" At this point she's freaking out and gets up to go to the neighbor's house. Number texts again, "Make sure you lock your doors tonight." She goes next door, leaving through the front door, which is on the opposite side of the house from the balcony. Once she gets to the neighbors, they call the police and wait until they arrive to go back to her condo. Police arrive, and once they're back in the house, they notice something hanging on the back door that leads to the balcony. It's a Raggedy Ann doll with a makeshift noose around its neck and a note that says "for the baby." At this point, even the police are frightened. They bag the doll for evidence. Kylie's dog won't stop barking at something out on the balcony, so a police officer walks over and shines his flashlight into the wooded area behind the condos. Sitting directly across from their balcony, there is a picnic blanket with a basket and teacups set up around it. They take that for evidence as well and attempt to trace the number, but the phone used was a burner. Kylie was too afraid to return home from school for a long time, and for the next month, his mother didn't sleep at home. They still have no idea who it could have been or why she was targeted. Kylie's mom has no ex-boyfriends, she doesn't really date, and none of her friends would go to that extreme to prank her. When Kylie told me the story, showed me the text messages from the number, and showed me the police report, I was absolutely terrified. I'm still scared to stay at her house late at night, and I drive a different way home every time. A weird stranger, while camping, pretended to be drunk. This happened to me about 7 years ago. So when I was 16, I was dating a guy who was just a little older, we'll call him Mitch. My parents never let us hang out alone, but to my surprise they let him come on a family camping trip with us. I believe my parents allowed Mitch to join us because it was a special occasion, the camping season was ending, and the site we were visiting had been a family tradition. However, this season would be the last time the site closed for camping because people had ruined it by dumping trash and trespassing on nearby properties. Anyway, so my dad, mom, Mitch, and I are all going camping. Mitch and I have our own tent, my parents have theirs. We had a wonderful first day there, we went on a Friday morning and planned to stay through Sunday night. Mitch and I spent the day walking along paths, catching lizards, swimming, exploring, and talking about creepypastas that involve the woods. At some point we were exploring and realized there were nearby properties, maybe 2 to 3 cabins, about 4 miles down a dirt road from our campsite. Later that night, my parents made a big fire, and we were eating burgers. My parents were drinking, and Mitch and I were trying to make s'mores while also pretending we weren't terrified after talking about creepypastas all day long. I'm in the middle of trying to explain the rake to my sloshed parents, and Mitch gasps because there's a guy walking down the road from the direction of the cabins. Again, it was like 4 miles away. So we all kind of get quiet, and my dad calls out to the guy something like, "Hey, how's it going?" And the guy doesn't say anything back. My dad called again, yelling, "Are you camping? We have this spot reserved." He wasn't being mean, he was just trying to get the guy to respond. The guy remains silent until he is almost at our campsite, which felt strange because it took him about 2 minutes of walking in silence to reach us after we initially called out to him. He comes up closer to us and is like, "Hey there, folks, I just like walking around, sometimes I take a walk down from my cabin and see if anyone's camping." So this guy sits down and talks to my parents for a while. My parents were very drunk, and I later learned they had been smoking pot all day. At the time, I was unaware of this, but they told me when I was older that they had been big potheads throughout my childhood. This explained why they were surprisingly relaxed and friendly with the strange man who appeared. They all discussed how unfortunate it was that the camping season was ending and how disappointing it was that this campsite was closing. Mitch and I whispered back and forth and were talking about how weird this guy was and how weird it was that he walked this far, didn't talk at first, and just invited himself to our campsite. Then we started noticing other things. Mitch pointed out that the guy's zipper was down, and he had on some lengthy cargo shorts, and his boxers were, like, poking out. And then I pointed out that in this entire interaction, the guy had been here for maybe 10 to 15 minutes now talking to my parents, he hadn't even acknowledged us with a single word, despite sitting across the fire from us and continuously looking at us. Then, we both started to notice how the guy was mimicking my parents. He went from being sober to acting like he was drunk. He started slurring his words, getting a bit wobbly, laughing, which sounded very strained, and being louder. Mitch and I were extremely freaked out because we had been discussing creepypastas all day, and this encounter felt just like one. The guy continued to act stranger and stranger, leaving us unable to communicate with my parents without him overhearing. Mitch and I stood up and walked a few feet behind us, over to the cooler, and pretended to get out some stuff to make hot dogs. As soon as we had backed off a few feet, the guy switched the convo to talk about us. He asked my parents if this was a double date, and they explained I was their kid and Mitch was my boyfriend. He asked how old we were, and they told him I was 16 and he was 18. He asked if we were good kids, they said yeah. Then he asked, well, where are they going to sleep tonight? I froze and looked at Mitch, who had reached out and squeezed the duck out of my forearm in fear and was staring at me wide-eyed. To my drunk, maybe high parents, this question didn't seem weird enough to even pause. The guy was still pretending to be drunk, and he was really playing it up at this point, nearly falling off the tote he was sitting on. My parents were like, laughing, we got them their tent. The guy said something like, oh, that's awfully nice of you, that'll be an experience for them. I can't explain it, but his tone made the comment sound very odd. I think this is when my parents kind of got clued into the weirdness. I looked at my mom, who looked slack-jawed and uncomfortable and was staring at me with a quizzical look. The guy kept talking, asking them, well, I see one tent, where's the other one? My dad was still talking to him and could barely keep his eyes open at this point, he was so out of it. My dad motioned towards my parents' tent and said that was theirs, and then threw his arm back super exaggerated in the direction of our tent, really not very far at all, and was like, and theirs is way over there. The guy perked right up and actually stood up a bit and pointed to their tent and said, so, that's your tent? And my dad agreed. And their tent is in that direction? And my dad ducking agreed. At this point I'm, like, shaking my head at my mom, and she looks pretty freaking sobered up. The guy keeps talking to my dad about the tents and about how he can't see Mitch's and my tent from there. It must be pretty well hidden or very far away. That's so nice of your parents for letting you have some alone time, etc. Mitch and I say we're going on a walk, and despite the woods being pitch black and us being creeped out, we go out walking down the trail the guy happened to come from. We get away far enough to not hear them and can barely see the fire, and we pull out our phones to see if we have a cell signal, and of course we don't. I'm being super dramatic and type out and send my friend a long message describing the situation, date, time, description of the guy, and that I love her, and my phone gives me the message that it'll send it when it finds service. The whole time I type, I'm reading it out loud to Mitch, and he's telling me stuff to add. We try to psych ourselves up and start walking back to the campfire. The guy is gone, but I thought maybe he was just peeing, so I whisper to my mom asking where he is. My parents both respond, he went back to his cabin a bit ago. He didn't pass you on the road? We're just like what? Now that he's gone and we feel safer, we start freaking out and yelling a mile a minute at my parents about how he didn't pass us, his fly being down, him acting drunk to match them, and how he pressed us for details about where we'd sleep that night. My mom agreed with us and said she noticed too, and it really freaked her out. My dad was pretty trashed but said he got a really creepy feeling from the guy. Mitch and I stayed with them and talked about the person and how freaked we were for about another hour, and then my parents wanted to go to bed. Mitch and I quickly ran to our tent, dragging it along with all of our belongings, and positioned it right next to my parents' tent. We couldn't sleep all night long, because every crunchy leaf made us think the person was creeping up. We didn't have any exciting or intimate camping experiences that night, but at least we avoided murder. I was camping at a somewhat isolated campground in the northern CA redwoods right on the beach. It's an amazing place to camp, and it was in November a few years back, so hardly anyone else was up there. Around midday this guy shows up, middle-aged, just had a car, no gear, seemed a little weird, but whatever. He came over and talked to us during sunset, which was fine but also somewhat annoying because it was sunset. He said he just flew into or and was exploring. He was a teacher on break, he said. He goes back to camp, goes in his car, and I assume falls asleep again. It just seemed weird, but whatever. Later that evening, I'm walking back from the bathroom, and he appears behind me, claiming he just woke up. Talked to him for about 15 to 20 minutes and got a super weird vibe from him after talking. Something just didn't seem right about him being there at all. That night, I slept with my knife near my head. In the middle of the night, I could have sworn I heard something moving around our tent, but I never saw what it was. It could have been a skunk or something, though. The next morning, I got up around 6:30, and he was gone. The site was completely empty. To this day, I'm still not sure if he was just a weird dude on vacation or a killer taking a night off, but something seemed really off about him being there. Have you ever been stalked on a trail? This all just happened only a few hours ago, so I am writing it down now while the memory is still fresh. My wife and I have been discussing it nonstop since it happened, but we can't find a reasonable explanation. Please help us figure this out so we can forget about it. I'll try to keep this all as short as possible, but I need to make sure you get all the details so you can help us figure this mess out. Today we planned on going on a 4-mile hike. The trail makes a big loop, with the beginning point also acting as the ending point. The story begins in the trail parking lot. There were about 5 other cars in the lot, and out of the car nearest us came a middle-aged couple. We paid them no mind as we typically do with strangers, and as we headed off to the restroom before hitting the trail, they set off on their own hike. When we started the hike, we chose route number 1, doing the loop counterclockwise. The trail itself makes a huge loop about 4 miles in length, with the parking lot being at the highest elevation and the lowest point being the middle of the trail. The ascent from the bottom middle section to the top going in either direction is extremely steep, slow, slippery, and tough. This is important information for later. About 20 minutes into our overall 3-hour hike, we reached point A, where we caught up with the older couple. About the time we caught up to them in the canyon, they decided to turn back towards the parking lot, passing us along the way. We exchanged smiles and waves as we passed, and again, thought nothing of it. From point A to point B, everything seemed totally normal. We were hot and tired, of course, but were enjoying ourselves and thought very little about the other couple. When we reached point B, about 2/3 RDS of the way through the loop, just starting the uphill climb back towards the parking lot, however, things started to get a little weird. As soon as we exited the low-lying canyon region, we saw the same couple heading towards us, as if they had returned to the parking lot and opted instead for route number 2. We still didn't find this to be completely out of the ordinary, as the first canyon, around point A, was tough to get down, and it seemed they were somewhat unprepared. The woman was wearing a knee-length skirt, a very bad choice for sliding down slippery canyon slopes and climbing steep rock bluffs, and it appeared they had not brought a pack with water or anything. We passed them again, exchanged pleasantries, and continued on. This time though, we did talk briefly about the situation. We found it odd that they made it far enough to meet us at this point, as the first parts of routes 1 and 2 were steep and slow, and the area between points A and B was pretty flat and steady. We thought it odd to see them there, given the terrain and their age/physical state, but we kept going, shrugging it off. Soon afterwards, we made it to the outlook, which was a couple hundred feet above the bottom section of the trail and 10 minutes past point B. As we paused to take some pictures and catch our breath, my wife pointed out she could hear their voices down below in the canyon as we rested. We listened and mutually agreed that it was probably the same couple, since the point the voices seemed to come from would be about the right spot for them to be at given the last location we saw them at and the lack of anyone else on the trail so far. Still, nothing too strange yet. That is until we reached point C. Between the outlook and point C, which was 20 minutes from the end of the loop and 40 minutes past point B, was a wide, gravel trail with steep drop-offs on either side. You could say it was sort of a ridge, as everything within the loop made a giant lopsided bowl much like a volcano, with the elevation difference between the lowest point of the trail and the highest point of the trail being about 500 feet. This made the terrain around the trail seem pretty much impassable. It was extremely steep and covered in thick undergrowth and fallen trees. It seems to be pretty much a given that the established trail is the only way to get from the outlook back to the parking lot. As we neared point C, we were becoming increasingly exhausted and ready to be done. We stopped once or twice for about 30 seconds apiece to catch our breath, and as we got closer and closer to point C, it was as if the energy was sucked out of us both. Of course the trail was tough, but we had done it and many like it before, and it was not even 80 degrees outside. Despite the wavering of our mental focus and the noticeable shift in our demeanor and attitude, we persevered, aware that the trail's end was imminent. When we reached point C, everything changed for the worse. Now keep in mind, we saw the older couple about 40 minutes earlier at point B, and there was no way to reach point C from there except the trail we were currently on. There were no shortcuts, there was no realistic way to pass us without us knowing, and there was no way to possibly beat us there. And yet, there they were. Sitting on a bench on the side of the trail eating lunch at that. As we passed them, the man mentioned something about a picnic to us and smiled, laughing. We tried our best to respond in kind, but the mood was as if we had just walked into a giant black cloud of smoke. I don't know how else to explain it, but the area around them disoriented us completely, and we no doubt were pale as ghosts and obviously shaken. Although the feeling wasn't malevolent and they didn't appear aggressive or strange, we were shocked into a state of horror upon seeing them there. It felt utterly impossible. We passed on by them, and as soon as we were out of earshot, my wife turned to me with a face I had never seen before in my life. We were terrified. Without saying a word to each other, we both experienced the same feeling of shock. It felt as if we had just walked through a time warp or as if we had brushed against another dimension. Our following discussion amounted to this. There is no way they could have beaten us there. Sure, maybe, possibly, just maybe there was a chance. But only if, after seeing us at point B, they sprinted through the woods in a direct line towards Point C. Now this would require them to run up steep rock bluffs, through unmarked woods, and who knows what else for over a mile. In 40 minutes. It took us 40 minutes to reach Point C while traveling at a good speed along the clear trail, which was only slightly longer than the direct route from B to C. Although we are in our early 20s and in decent shape, we were dead tired by the time we saw them. They couldn't have arrived before us, even if they took a direct route, based on their apparent level of preparedness and fitness. Furthermore, they unexpectedly discovered 2 Bud Lights and a lunchbox filled with sandwiches along the way, and by the time we reached Point C, they were already nearly finished consuming them. All of these things combined with the overwhelming feelings we got when we encountered them at Point C have left us in mental shambles for the past several hours. We don't know how to interpret this situation or formulate a coherent explanation. Please help us figure out what this was, or who they were. Almost ended on a camping trip. This happened 2 years ago, August 11, 2018, and since the anniversary just passed, I thought I should finally share this story. My fiancé and I were on the second night of our 2-night camping trip at a popular campground about a half hour from where we live. For reference, my fiancé is black. We live in a predominantly white, conservative, and racist area. This is important later. On our first night, we kept hearing noises in the woods around us. The campsite right beside ours to the right was occupied, but the one to the left was not. The campsites are about 150 yards apart, and we had camped here in the same exact plot the year before. Needless to say, we were familiar with the area and the various kinds of animals that live in the woods. The first night, we heard shuffling around our tent. It was obviously something large moving around. We brushed it off and assumed it was just a deer. Now back to the main event. On August 11th, we spent the day at the battlefields in a town over with my family. They had all been invited to join us for the day by my fiancé as a surprise for me while he proposed to me. We stayed with my family into the evening, until about 6 p.m., before heading back to our campsite. When we got back, things were really odd. Someone had obviously been in our tent. Our blankets were thrown around, clothes were on the floor, and my backpack had been rearranged, and I was missing underwear. But hey, we were stupid 19-year-olds and decided that since whoever had busted in had left and hadn't taken anything important, it was fine and they wouldn't come back. So we set up a campfire and sat out until it was dark, roasting hot dogs and s'mores, smoking cigarettes, and celebrating our engagement. Around 9:30 p.m. we put out our fire and decided to go into our tent for the night to celebrate a little more. Nothing too loud or obnoxious. Immediately after we finished, we started to hear the noises outside of our tent again. But this time we focused in. We heard clear footsteps and, at one point, a man whispering. We looked at each other, and our eyes got wide. Someone was definitely walking around outside our tent. We were still and completely silent, just listening to the footsteps, and we heard whispering again. Shit. Make that 2 men walking around our tent. As if we had the ability to read minds, my fiancé said, "I have to go to the bathroom," and I agreed. The bathroom was up the hill from our site. Most people who were in lower sites like ours drove their cars up to the bathroom. Now here is the part I still get chills thinking about. We got up and were getting dressed. My fiancé had just turned on the light in our tent and put his binder on when a man spoke directly to us from right outside the tent. "What are you doing?" I can't even describe how malicious and menacing this voice sounded. It was clearly directed at us, and he said it with a snicker. He was watching us through the walls of the tent. Again, for this part, we were stupid 19-year-olds. So we decided to just run for it to the car. My fiancé grabbed his pocket knife and his keys and stepped out of the tent. He pulled me with him, and we ran like hell to the car. I heard the footsteps running behind us and then turning and running up to another campsite. At the bathroom, we talked over our options. We talked about sleeping in the car or driving into the town. Then we had another idea. We drove back down to our campsite and began packing everything into the car. At this point it was around midnight. We moved faster than I think either of us thought possible, wrapping up the tent with our belongings still in it and grabbing our folding chairs. We were all packed in 5 minutes and hopped into the car to leave. I jumped out at the end of the drive and grabbed our nameplate, which had my full name on it, off of the post. As we pulled out of the campsite, I saw our assailants for the first time. Stalking through the woods onto our campsite were 2 tall white men. I realized that these were the same men who had been driving past our campsite the whole time we were there, just glaring at us and muttering to each other. One was wearing camo hunting gear, and the other was wearing a Confederate flag tank top. Both were carrying large hunting knives, unsheathed and at the ready. They turned when they saw our car driving away, and one started to give chase until the other stopped him. I made eye contact with the man in camo, and he smiled the most terrifyingly evil smile at me and shook his head slowly. We drove the long way home, taking all the weirdest, hardest to follow roads, and called my dad so he would know we were coming. When we got home, we told my dad everything, and he shrugged it off as us being paranoid. So I never told anyone else besides all of you now. I am convinced to this day that this was going to be a racially motivated attack. The campground was not heavily populated, and my fiancée was the only non-white person at any of the campsites. It was no accident that the two men who had been shadowing us since our arrival and wore Confederate flags and had one on their truck decided to target the interracial couple. I still get cold chills when I think about how close we were to being ended or seriously hurt that night and just how lucky we were that our reckless plan to just make a run for it worked. So to those men who stalked our campsite with the hunting knives, let's not meet. Thanks to anyone who sticks around to listen to it all.